Tere, head rändehuvilised ja eksperdid, hea asekantsler, hea rektor, head ettekandjad.
Honorable
Tere tulemast
Undersecretary, Director,
Eestisse, Tallinnasse,
members of the
Maarjamäele,
audience. Welcome to
Sisekaitseakadeemiasse.
Estonia. Welcome to
Minu nimi
Maarjamäe,
on
to
Martin
the Estonian
Martinson
Academy of
ja olen
Security
tänase sündmuse
Sciences.
moderaatori
My name is
auväärt
Martin
rollis.
Martinson and I'm the
Mul on
moderator
väga hea
for
meel tervitada
today.
teid sel
I'm honorable
veikel
to be
vihmasel
the moderator.
sügispäeval Euroopa
I'm happy to
rändevõrgustiku
welcome
Eesti
you on this
kontaktpunkti
rainy day
konverentsil
at this European
Kodakondsus ja ränne
Migration
täna ja
Network
homme.
conference
Nagu praegusel
titled
ajastule
Citizenship
kohane,
and Migration today
toimub
and
ka meie
tomorrow.
konverents natukene erilisemalt,
Like it has been happening the recent times, our conference is a bit special as well, so it takes place both online and also on-site at the Estonian Academy of Security Sciences, where we have a small group of people already also present in person. The conference is also broadcast over a live stream. There is a live stream for the original version of the presentations, and the other web stream is in English.
If you do not yet understand Estonian, then the chances are that the conference will make much more sense to you if you follow us through the English live stream link. This will guarantee that you can enjoy the results of the hard work that is being done by our interpreters, who are translating everything into English for you.
Our conference will today last to around 2:30, and it consists of 3 panels and 2 breaks in between the panels. In panel 1, we take an international look at the acquisition of citizenship in EU member states. Panel 2 will focus on the choices in Estonian migration policy, looking at the past, the future and the present. And in the final panel, you will hear a lot of interesting information about the annual report of Estonia's migration and citizenship policy. The participants of the conference can also ask written questions from the speakers. You can do it online at www.slido.com. So please post your questions there by using the hashtag citizenship. Please submit your questions in the written form also when you are present on site in person at the Estonian Academy of Security Sciences. And before I give the floor over to Mr. Undersecretary for Internal Security, Migration and Public Order and to the Rector, let me tell you a bit about the Estonian contact point of European Migration Network. The network is a research and information exchange network funded by the European Commission, consisting of the national contact points and affiliated organizations that the contact points work with. Starting from 2020, the Estonian contact point for the European Migration Network is at the Estonian Academy of Security Sciences in the Internal Security Institute. For those who have not heard about the European Migration Network, you can also subscribe to our informative newsletter, and you can take a look at the Migration Network at the webpage www.emn.ee. So I shall use no more of your time. I wish you all a fruitful conference, and I will hand the floor now over to the Undersecretary for Internal Security, Migration and Kokomossar. Happy to welcome you and to introduce today where we are focusing on the choices of the citizenship policy. The highest holder of power in democratic countries is the people. So it is not only a liaison between the state and the people, but it also forms an important part of our identity. I would hereby like to remind you and stress that without the citizens, a state cannot function as well. And the organization of life of a person depends on a person's right to live in a country, in a particular state, be it the opportunity to work, to study, or to be with your kith and kin. And people's choices of where to live in depend on the security that the state offers and also how attractive the state is and how much a person can realize themselves. Nevertheless, there are always factors that we cannot predict beforehand. Among them is also the spread of the coronavirus and stopping the spread of the coronavirus that has had a major impact on migration in many states. We have to learn from that, and we have to be better prepared for situations like that in the future. No doubt, the informed direction of the migration pathways is vital. And we also know that we have to bear in mind all the factors that influence a person's way of life. We have to carefully consider these factors. We have to discuss what is citizenship and how difficult is it to acquire citizenship. We have to see whether a state has done enough so that a state's citizenship can be achieved. The other thing is that the person would have to really perceive the need to obtain citizenship. Each citizen has to really be internally proud of being a citizen of a particular state. So in Estonia, we have really strived towards making sure that more and more people can have the opportunity to really connect with the state of Estonia in the citizenship perspective as well. The citizenship policy that we have had over the last years has reduced the number of stateless people among children, giving a child that is born in Estonia citizenship right after they are born. We have also signed the citizenship agreement with people so that a person applying for citizenship takes on certain obligations, and the state, on the other hand, will pay for language studies and will also remunerate some days off from work needed to prepare for the citizenship exam. We must also make sure that nobody hurts the state or a citizen in terms of acquiring citizenship. And the Parliament has held negotiations over naturalization processes, for example, when a person has committed a serious crime against the state. And in terms of the general principles of migration and asylum, there is the new EU Pact on Migration and Asylum. All EU member states have to agree on the principles. We can see a lot of progress that has been made on migration pathways, direction and management. For example, we know now that we need to strengthen the protection of the external borders. We also need to enable the border guard to return the people on the border, and we also know how important it is to deal with the matters in the country of origin. There is also the solidarity principle, and in the future we think that the member states should provide solidarity in as effective way as possible. I would like to thank the European Migration Network and the Estonian Academy of Security Sciences that continue to be irreplaceable partners for us and have also facilitated today's conference. I would like to wish a lot of good and progressive thoughts for all the participants of the conference, and let us all work on valuing citizenship, and let us make sure that migration guarantees both the rights of the state, of the society, and of a citizen. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much to the Undersecretary. And another important person will now make a welcome statement. Mr. Marek Link, Director for the Estonian Academy of Security Sciences. The floor is yours.
Good morning,
Ladies and gentlemen, guests, dear Undersecretary, Honorable Undersecretary. We are holding this conference at quite a significant time. I have seen many schools and authorities really doubting about how to behave in this crisis, in this pandemic. Should we cancel everything, put everything on hold, or find smart opportunities for being together? People tend to survive, tend to be creative, and I'm very happy that this conference is taking place, because why should we let the virus win? On the other hand, the Estonian contact point of the Estonian migration network should also be congratulated, because this is a contact point that has been traveling extensively around Estonia as well, and now I can say welcome home. You were in our building before, now you are back here, and it is a wonderful home that you have. And I think that you are in the middle of the most modern learning environment of an European Academy of Security Sciences. When you look outside, look at the weather, you can see that it is the peak season of migration. Thousands of birds are leaving Estonia to spend the winter in a warm country. And if we could do like they are doing, we should probably go as well. But in the current times, we can all see and feel what happens when one of the fundamental rights that we have is limited for some reason. What does it feel like? Everybody would like to travel freely, move around freely, but we can well understand why is this the case, that things are like they are. Today, and like it is with all crises, it can be said that something good is the result of each crisis. But this crisis has also brought around a new term, which is called the new normality. The new normality does not appear out of nowhere. It has to be created. I sincerely hope that when we learn to live in this new normality, we shall not have the old mentality, so that we would still create a society that unites people, not separates people, focuses on what unites people, not on the differences. We should move forward together, and today's conference also talks about migration and citizenship today and tomorrow. Thoughts are free in this environment, and the most important element here is to really dare to think critically and constructively. And once the ideas have been exchanged in the form of words, I really wish that these words turn into action one day as well. I wish you a lot of ideas. Do talk, do ask questions, be present both here and online. And once again, congratulations to the Migration Network. I can see that you are definitely present here with us with this conference. That is one of the key events in the year. So I wish you a lot of success, good luck, and have a fruitful conference. Thank you very much. Thank you so much for these encouraging, welcoming statements. Like I briefly mentioned beforehand, then the first session or the panel of today has a very international taste to it. So you can hear about the EU citizenship, both in the EU and also as an example from Ireland. And you can also hear about what is the impact of Brexit on the value of British citizenship. And I'm delighted to now introduce Norma Rose to you to make the first presentation. And she has been nominated as the senior consultant at ICF by the European Commission. She has been focusing on asylum and migration policy, solidarity within the EU, on the legislative acts of the second generation of EU migration, and on the highly qualified labor force migrating to the EU.
In your case, the live stream. is yours, at least for the next 15 to 20 minutes.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here this morning and present to you the key findings of an EMN study that was recently published in summer, where we looked into the pathways to citizenships for third country nationals in the EU, and we summarize and compare the policies in place in the EU member states and the UK. If you're looking for more detailed information on specific member states, I'd just like to point out that we do have many national reports available on the EMN website, because today I will just be presenting the overview and the comparative overview of what's happening at the across the EU. So just to let you know what I'll be talking about today, I will start with a brief introduction on the aim and the scope of the study, just so you're aware. Then I will look into the legal and policy overview related to the acquisition of citizenship across the EU. Then I will explain a bit what conditions and requirements need to be fulfilled for third country nationals to acquire citizenship in EU member states. We will also look into some procedural aspects and also cover the topic of dual citizenship briefly, as well as the link between citizenship and integration. So we really aim to provide a comparative overview of the frameworks in place across the EU member states for new migrants from third countries. What we mean with new migrants in this context is first generation migrants, so not second or third generation ones that don't have any pre-existing ties with the member state in question. And we look in particular at naturalization, at ordinary naturalization, which is the common procedure in order to gain citizenship for third country nationals. So in total, we cover 25 member states, including the UK. So for the purpose of the study, the UK was still considered a member state at the time of the development of this report. And we cover a 5-year period from 2014 to 2019, although we do also briefly look into the impact of COVID-19, as that was very timely and relevant at the time of publication, and is of course still very relevant now. So just to give you a bit of a brief legal and policy overview related to the acquisition of citizenship. So citizenship is largely a matter of national law. There is not any EU law that directly relates to citizenship. But of course, the aspect of EU citizenship cannot be ignored, which is why member states must have due regard to EU law, because once you get the citizenship of a member state, that means that you automatically are also conferred EU citizenship, meaning that the person is entitled to free movement and other rights that come along with it. We found that around 40 member states actually underwent major changes in their national laws and policies in the last 5 years. And it's interesting to know that we noted 2 different approaches there. Some member states took a more liberal approach, meaning that they loosened the requirements in place to attain citizenship for third country nationals, sometimes because they want to ensure that they are better integrated, or because of historical considerations or special ties that they want to acknowledge. Other member states have put in place a bit more restrictive measures. Also there they aimed sometimes at ensuring actually better integration. So they wanted to make sure that once a third country national becomes a citizenship, he or she is really fully integrated. Or others did it out of concerns for public security, for instance. We also wanted to present briefly a few statistics that are available on Eurostat actually regarding the conferral of citizenship. So we found that in 2018, which is the latest available data, 656,000 third country nationals were granted the citizenship of an EU member state. As you can see on the graph, this is fairly, well, there are not many fluctuations, and in total, 79% were actually 79% of all citizenship acquisitions were were done via third country nationals, actually, and not EU, and the rest was done by EU citizens. Sorry. Okay. So yes, in terms of the top countries of origin, as I mentioned, Moroccans on an EU, looking at the EU perspective, were the largest share of former nationals, followed by Albanians and Turkish citizenships. But here it's really important to note that the former citizenships actually varied significantly across member states. So for instance, in Latvia, actually US nationals were the second largest group of people that obtained citizenship, whereas in Sweden, for instance, those were Syrians and Somalians. So what you can see on the map here is really the EU level average. What kind of rights and duties come with the conferral of citizenship? Those are actually quite common across all the EU. So among the most common rights is the right to vote, of course, to stand for elections for public office, to access certain professions and social rights, and to get consular assistance when you're abroad. There are also some duties that come along with it. For instance, in those member states where there's an obligation to vote, you are then also obliged to vote. There's military service that you might need to participate in, or the judicial system. But this, of course, also depends on the member state in question. So as I mentioned, we are really looking into ordinary naturalization in this study specifically. So there are different modes of acquiring citizenship, but we are really looking into ordinary naturalization, meaning that certain conditions have to be fulfilled in order for a third country national to obtain that citizenship. And we'll look into those a bit more in the next couple of slides. Special naturalization is also possible in some member states, or actually in most member states, on certain grounds. For instance, when you're a child to a national, of course, or if there's a link through cultural heritage or marriage statelessness, etc. So, but we really don't cover that in a lot of detail in the study. To acquire citizenship through ordinary naturalization, various requirements have to be fulfilled. First and most importantly, the third country national has to have a minimum period of residence in the member state in question. And that the duration of that period varies quite significantly between member states, from as little as 3 years in some to 10 years in others. But the average, I would say, is around 5 years. Although a short period of absences are usually permitted in member states, although here also the duration varies. And those absences are usually for holidays or family visits, of course. In order to be recognized as a period of residence, you have to be actually registered in the country of application. And that period is usually based on effective residence. So you have to be physically present on the territory. This is the case in most member states. There are some that don't require this, but most of them do say that you need to be actually in the country in order for it to count towards your minimum period of residence. And in order to prove that, you have to have a valid legal residence status for that member state. Temporary residence permits are also often permitted in all but actually 8 member states, but also refugee status or subsidiary protection status usually counts towards that minimum period of residence. So to prove that legal residence criteria has been met, member states accept a variety of different documents. Most commonly, having an entry in official registers of the member state is accepted as proof, but also employment contracts, for instance, or tax records count in some member states that you can see on the slide, or even rental contracts, for instance. So there's a variety of different documents that third country nationals can submit in order to prove that they have been residing in that member state. Another very important criteria is language, of course. So this is actually a legal official requirement in 22 member states, but also here some exemptions apply. And in Cyprus, Ireland, and Sweden, there's actually no official requirement in terms of language. The level of knowledge required actually varies quite significantly. There are some, for instance, Bulgaria, where only a elementary knowledge of the language is required, whereas in others, such as a B1 level is actually needed. And to prove that, a language certificate is usually accepted as proof, although some member states do carry out personal interviews to prove the knowledge of language. And 6 member states actually require the applicants to take a specific language test just for the purpose of that citizenship application. Another important requirement in 13 member states is a citizenship or integration test that applicants have to take, which is usually done in writing or via interviews. And there are also other conditions that apply. The applicant usually has to prove a good conduct in general, and adhering to public order requirements, for instance, proof by an absence of a criminal record, payment of taxes and debts, and so on. But these differ quite substantially between member states. Applicants also have to commit to certain values, legally or symbolically, in 15 member states, or do a pledge of formal allegiance in 60 member states. Also, the economic or financial situation is often taken into account when when applying for citizenship, which is the case in 14 member states. So in terms of the procedure, how do you apply for citizenship? So all in all, we noted that there are some member states that take a rather horizontal approach, whereby one main authority is responsible for processing the application, versus those member states who follow more of a bottom-up approach, where the application is passed from one level, so usually from the local level up to the top level. Ultimately ending with the head of state or government, actually. So for the submission, mostly the local authorities are involved. They accept the application and often also check them for completeness and validity. And then the decision making, it depends a bit on the member state, but various ministries, for instance, the Ministry of Interior or Justice, are involved. And then the final decision is usually taken by the president, actually, or the responsible minister, prime minister. An appeal is not always possible, which is actually quite interesting. So in the end, it's really still up to the member state to decide whether or not an applicant is to become a citizen. In Belgium and Germany, this is different. There, the applicant has the right to be naturalized if all legal requirements are fulfilled. And in some member states, you have to undergo a citizenship ceremony or an oath of allegiance to close the process. In terms of accessibility, we found that only 5 member states actually currently use a digitized procedure or allow online applications to be made for citizenship, although 6 member states are currently working towards that, and we expect that due to COVID, of course, more member states might go down that route. The time period for processing applications is actually varies quite substantially between member states. So it can be as little as 6 months in a member state, or up to 48 months, which is the case in Italy, for example. Also, the cost of applying for citizenship differs quite substantially. In some member states, there are no fees to lodge the application as such, whereas in others, this can be up to 1,500 euros, actually. So there are a variety of different documents that are required for naturalization. For instance, most commonly, of course, you have to provide an ID or travel document to prove your identity. Many member states ask for a birth certificate or a proof of legal residence, for instance. There are also other documents that are needed, depending, for instance, if there's a language requirement or a citizenship test needed. But also some member states even require a CV of the applicant. So briefly talking about the measures adopted in light of the COVID-19 pandemic. Well, at the time of writing, which was May, June. Of course, the situation was a bit different maybe than now in some member states. But back then, 40 member states actually did not take any specific measures to respond to the impact of the pandemic, although most of them did note that the application procedure was delayed quite significantly, or some did not accept new applications, but only processed existing ones, for instance. And also the appeal proceedings for citizenship applications were halted or cancelled in some member states, or others moved to online processes. In terms of dual citizenship, this is quite an interesting topic, because here also member states quite differed in their approach, although 70 member states do, so the majority do allow dual citizenship. To acknowledge, for instance, that the third country national still remains connected to the home country, even though he or she then gets the citizenship of an EU member state. And those countries that don't allow dual citizenship, such as Austria or Germany, they argue that in order to be fully integrated and acknowledge that the new link with the member state, the citizenship should be given up. But it should be noted that here quite a lot of exceptions actually apply. So dual citizenship is still possible for certain individuals, and it's really not the norm that there's no possibility at all to have dual citizenship in those member states. But some member states also noted challenges that come along with allowing dual citizenship. For instance, in Finland noted that there are national security issues, or Greece also said that having two passports often enables the holders to evade national security checks or authority checks, which can be a problem for the member state. In terms of citizenship and integration, there are also two different approaches generally that are followed by the member states. There's that group of member states that really see citizenship as a combination of the integration process, so basically the end of the road for a third country national. And then there's those member states that see citizenship as part of the integration process. So even though you get the citizenship, that does not mean that you're fully integrated, but it's just an important step towards that. But you can find some more details about this whole discussion also in the synthesis report. And we found that actually it's quite an interesting discussion going on at the national level in some member states about this. But we found that also citizenship, unfortunately, is no guarantee against discrimination in the labor market, for instance. Although the labor market opportunities of citizens are usually higher than for third country nationals, there's still no guarantee against discrimination, as a survey by the Fundamental Rights Agency found. So in terms of the conclusions and lessons learned, well, just to summarize, citizenship is really the legal bond between an individual and their state. And there has been quite an evolution of national policies at the national level, although we really found that there seems to be a very lively debate also at national level as to whether the citizenship process should be facilitated or made more difficult to access, and so on. In general, the procedures are quite harmonized across member states, so the most common steps are very similar, but of course there are a variety of specific conditions apply, and the access to citizenship is much easier in some member states than in others. Dual citizenship is the main principle across the EU, although here as well there are some outliers. And yes, as I mentioned, there's this dichotomy of seeing citizenship as an outcome of integration rather than a driver for better integration. So that was all from my side. If you're interested in having a look at the synthesis report, where you can find a lot more details about what I've just been talking about, please do have a look at our website of the EMN, and do follow us on Twitter as well for any updates on the EMN's work. Many thanks. Thanks. Okay. Yes, of course. Yes. So as I mentioned, there are, I mean, this is really subject of ongoing debate in all member states, or in most member states. I mean, we didn't really look so much into the future, I must admit, in this study. So we focused on what member states did in the past 5 years. But from what we could see, there are some debates. For instance, I remember in Sweden there's an ongoing debate about the language requirement, because Sweden no longer, as for some years now, no longer requires an applicant to fulfill a certain language requirement. But there's actually debate about whether that's sensible and or whether that maybe should be changed back. So yeah, so that's just one example where there might be a change in legislation in the future, or a change in policy. Yeah, that'd be my answer. Thanks.
We move on to the next presentation. We should look at a short 3-minute video that relates both to Norma's presentation and to the following presentation as well. So let us watch it together.
Many of them move to Europe permanently and after some time decide to apply for citizenship of their host state. In 2018, some 656,000 third country nationals were granted the citizenship of an EU member state. Usually citizenship is acquired through birth, either passed on from parents, jus sanguinis, or by birth on the country's territory, jus soli. Another way to acquire citizenship is through application. This is known as naturalisation. All member states offer the possibility to naturalisation, but the rules differ across countries. To find out about these criteria, a new EMN study compared naturalisation schemes across EU member states. The study found that all member states require a minimum period of legal residence and good conduct and public order. Most also require knowledge of the host country's language. In half of the member states, applicants also have to pass a citizenship or integration test. Some countries also review the applicant's economic situation and expect legal or symbolic commitment to certain values. Citizenship entails rights as well as duties. Rights in member states may include voting, standing for parliamentary election, access to certain professions, more preferable conditions for social security. Duties may include compulsory military service, participation in the judicial system, participating or assisting in national defence. Many migrants stay connected to their country of origin even after receiving the citizenship of their host countries. Therefore, they may wish to keep their former citizenship as well. In over half of the member states in the study, dual citizenship is possible. Studies have shown that naturalised immigrants in general tend to be better integrated than non-nationals. Views on the relationship between citizenship and integration, however, vary across member states. In some, citizenship is seen as the culmination of the integration process, while in others, it is seen as a way to facilitate the integration of migrants into the host society. A total of 25 European countries conducted a study on their pathways to citizenship for third country nationals. These studies are summarised in the EU Synthesis Report. If you want to know more, check out the full report at the EMN website.
It would be bizarre to talk about citizenship and migration policy without engaging one's neighbours and listening to what they have to say. Our next speaker joins us online from Finland, Tuukka Lampi. He's the senior analyst at the Finnish contact point for European Migration Network. Previously, she has worked at the IOM as well and at the Finnish embassy in New Delhi.
I am surrendering the live stream to you now for the next 15 to 20 minutes.
Hello, can you hear me?
We can, and if you want to share your slides, then please share the screen as well.
Excellent, I will do that. Thank you, EMN Estonia, for having me in your conference. I'm very happy to be here, and thank you also, Norma, for your presentation on the EMN synthesis report. And I will now zoom in a bit and go through some of the findings of the Finnish national report on the EMN study on pathways to citizenship. I'll go first for a quick overview on citizenship in Finland, and then move on to some of the key requirements for naturalization in a bit more detail, and then I will conclude with some findings regarding citizenship and integration. Now, let me just find this slides, and can you see my slides? Excellent. All right. So let me get right to it then. First of all, I've listed some of the rights that Finnish citizenship entails. So first of all, these are very similar to many of the other member states. As you can see, there's right to the Finnish passport. There is the right to refuse extradition to another country, but you also right to enter Finland at any time, and right for any political activity such as presidential elections, parliamentary elections, and referendums after turning 18. Right to vote. Interestingly enough, though, third country residents in Finland do have the right to vote in municipal elections, so they do still have some political agency on local level. And then there's the right to stand to parliamentary election as well, and also possibility to be appointed to public offices, to some public offices. And I will get back to that in a bit later in my presentation. And as well as, of course, you have all the rights of an EU citizen, freedom of movement, employment in the EU, etc., as well as the right to vote and become a candidate in EU elections. So like I said, very similar to many other member states. Finnish citizenship also comes with some obligations, mainly the obligation to participate in national defense. This mainly applies for males, or this applies for male citizens over the age of 18 who have to join military service. As well as there's the obligation to comply with Finnish laws in and outside of Finland as well. Because a Finnish citizen can be actually convicted in Finland or out for a crime committed abroad. I myself, for example, when I was working at the nationality unit, had one case where a person was actually refused citizenship because he had committed a serious crime abroad. So it can happen. Here's a quick statistical overview of citizenship applications, and the blue line on top shows the applications and the amount of applications. So as you can see, it has for the last 5 years remained fairly stable, around 12,000 to 13,000. Last year, 2019, we saw a slight uptick to 13,300, and we can expect probably the amount of citizenship applications to rise in the near future, because many of the asylum seekers who arrived in Europe and Finland in 2014, 2015 now have stayed in Finland for the minimum period of residence. So many of them are certainly interested in applying for citizenship now. So like I said, there's a slight prediction in the future that we can expect some more applications to come. Then in the middle, the green line is, or the turquoise line is persons granted Finnish citizenship. And as you can see, that has also been fairly stable, with save for the slight increase or slight peak in 2017. From our information, those were mainly Russian, Estonian, and Somali citizens who applied for citizenship, who were mostly granted citizenship at that time. And personally, I couldn't find any further explanation why the big increase, but ever since it also has stayed close to in the neighborhood of 10,000. And then the red line shows the amount of negative decisions, which has also been fluctuating between 1,500 and 2,500. Top 5 nationalities. There's a slight difference between applicants and people who actually are granted citizenship. So number 1 on both cases is still Russia, since for obvious reasons, since it's the neighboring country and a lot of cross-border traffic. And number 2 in people who apply are Iraqi citizens, but then number 2 people who are granted citizenship are actually Estonians. If I remember correctly, Estonians have had so far approximately a 95–96% approval rate. So many apply and many are also granted. It's a fairly straightforward process. And then one interesting point of note on the top 5 applicants is Syrian citizens from last year. Since earlier they were not so many, but in 2019 we started already seeing the phenomenon that I mentioned before, that many Syrians, for example, who had come to Finland had now stayed for at least 4 years. So we saw an increase in Syrian citizens applying Finnish citizenship. Here is another statistical chart on the positive and negative decisions, mainly showing also the percentages, and you can see that the ratio of positive and negative decisions has remained fairly stable throughout the last years, and on average 85% positive, 15% negative, with slight increases plus and minus. Move on to some of the legal context. On an international level, Finland is party to the 1961 UN Convention on the Reduction of Statelessness, which essentially means that Finland has signed into law many caveats to prevent people from remaining stateless in Finland. And then, of course, Finland is party to the 1997 European Convention on Nationality. And then on the national level, there are main legal instruments regulating citizenship is the Finnish Constitution, which mentions or which states that Finnish citizenship is mainly passed through birth, and then further stipulations are laid down in the Nationality Act of Finland. And then there's the Nationality Act itself, which is the main document for anybody dealing with citizenship. It lays down all the ground rules and all the requirements for granting citizenship and the eligibility. And then finally, there's the government decree on nationality, which basically lays down in more detail the different responsibilities of different authorities that have to deal with citizenship applications or granting citizenship. Then there are a bunch of other acts which are also relevant to citizenship. For example, there's the Administrative Procedure Act, which essentially lays down the rules on good governance and how the application process in general is supposed to be handled. Then there's the Aliens Act, which lays down, of course, has the list of ground rules on legal residence of aliens. And then there's the Passport Act, which basically just states how a passport, under which circumstances a passport is granted or not granted. In recent years, there have not been very many legislative amendments to the Nationality Act or any acts referring to nationality or citizenship. But I've listed the 3 main ones from which came into effect last year. First, in April, beginning of April, there was the amendment came into effect the Amendment to Maternity Act, which facilitated female same-sex couples to pass Finnish citizenship to their children. This essentially meant that a female same-sex couple there was the mother who gave birth to the child, and then there's the other mother who then, if the other mother then happened to be a Finnish citizen, then they could also pass on their citizenship now to their children without the need for internal adoption, which was earlier the case. And so it facilitated the process for them. Then there was the amendment to the Nationality Act, which gave the possibility to revoke citizenship or remove citizenship based on certain crime for people who are sentenced to certain crimes, such as these are severe crimes such as terrorism, treason, etc. But this, of course, with the caveat that a person had ties to another country or citizenship from another country. So Finland still, even though Finland can now, the Finnish government can actually strip a person from their Finnish citizenship, they cannot make a person stateless still. And then in July 2019, there was the amendment placing restrictions on dual citizens being appointed to some higher military and border guard posts. And these were also, it also posed restrictions on some of the trainings for higher office or military and border guard academy. I'll get to that in a bit again. The amendments to law legislation that I've mentioned just now are, many of them have come from how citizenship has been handled lately in public discussions. Public debate in recent years generally has revolved around national security and crime control. I listed three main things that where citizenship was lately mentioned. First of all, there was dual citizens in public office, like I mentioned. There have been concerns that people in higher offices, military offices, for example, might be subject to foreign influence. So therefore, there was a whole debate regarding whether people in those offices should be, if they are dual citizens, whether they should be granted. And it eventually led to the change in the law. And then in late 2018, there was a case of sexual crimes that were sexual assaults and rapes that were found out in the northern city of Oulu. And that prompted a discussion on, and some of the suspects were actually people of asylum seeker background who had recently been granted citizenship, if I remember correctly. And because of that, that prompted a discussion regarding whether some of the rules on citizenship be tightened. And then losing citizenship due to criminal activity. This came in the aftermath of the events of 2015 European migration, of the arrival of many asylum seekers to Europe. This came in the aftermath where the Finnish government also was concerned with matters of international terrorism, and it was also connected to the dual citizenship debate. And essentially, this also eventually led to the whole amendment to nationality law, where a person can be actually now revoked of their citizenship or stripped of their citizenship in certain cases. So then, how does one get Finnish citizenship? As I mentioned, it's laid down in the Nationality Act, and mostly it absorbs the principle of jus sanguinis, which means citizenship by birth. So I've listed here the Section 9 of the Nationality Act, which just listed. Firstly, you mostly gain your citizenship through your mother, if your mother is Finnish, or you can also get it through your father, with some caveats. For example, if the father has to be married to the child's mother, and or the paternity of the child has to be at least established. And thirdly is the same as number 2, but basically has the same provisions, but in cases where if the father happens to be deceased. So mainly it is passed on through. In most cases in Finland, it is passed through birth. However, in some cases, the jus soli, aka granting citizenship by birth and territory, can also be observed. These are mostly cases where you try to prevent children to become stateless. So, for example, cases where a child is born and does not acquire the citizenship automatically, or doesn't even have a secondary right to acquire the citizenship of any foreign state, or in cases where child's parents are refugees and they cannot be They cannot turn to the authorities of their own of their former or their country of origin. Or foundlings, where the parents are foundly just simply unknown. Or children born in Finland to parents whose citizenship is unknown. So only in all those cases when it cannot be established that the person, where it cannot be clearly defined, a person can be granted Finnish citizenship. And then there's I'll jump a few slides. This was a citizenship declaration, which is basically has to do with former Finnish citizens, and I'll move on to the actual conditions. So conditions required for Finnish citizenship are period of residence, language, good conduct, reliable source of income, and established identity. Firstly, period of residence. 5 years is without interruption if the person has stayed without interruption in Finland, or 7 years if there have been gaps in their stay in Finland. The total amount of years has to be then 7 years. Then there are certain groups which have some exceptions, such as refugees, spouses of Finnish citizens, and Nordic citizens, and former Finnish citizens. Language is one of the main requirements, and as Norma mentioned, in many other member states, also in Finland, it's B1, so Finnish, or you have to be able to oral and written Finnish, Swedish, or either of those languages, sign language. And there's a variety of documents or certificates which are listed in the Nationality Act where you can prove this. And then there are some exceptions where people can, if you are illiterate and you can prove it, or if you are elderly and you have a protection refugee background, or if there are health reasons. But like I said, these are very rarely, but these exceptions are very rarely made. Good conduct, this has to do basically with crime. People should not have committed crimes, or they should have restraining orders. Of course, if you have a speeding ticket, for example, then that might not prevent you from getting citizenship. But there's an overall assessment of the person's criminal record, and the general situation is, the general crime record is reviewed. And there are a few crimes such as sexual offenses and homicides, which of course never expire, so those can always affect your citizenship. And then there's unpaid fees such as fines, taxes, or even student debt sometimes, in some cases, which might affect your might affect their application. Then there's income. A person has to have a list of, have to prove their income of a first period of their sources of income for the whole period of residence. This can be anything from employment to even grants or benefits from the state. These are actually connected to the period of residence requirement. So basically, it's a way to prove that a person has stayed in Finland for the minimum amount of period, and economic activity is a way to do that. Established identity is one of the most important ones. This is basically where the Finnish immigration goes through a person's immigration history and sees if there's any inconsistencies in their personal data, and also if the person has to be able to prove their identity either with a valid identity document or other means, such as date of birth, like giving consistent data on their personal data, date of birth, citizenship, family relations, etc. And this has been a consistent issue with, unfortunately, with processing applications, such as lack of documents, falsified documents, and inconsistent data. So those are the main ones. Here's a list of the top 5 from 2018 statistics, which was available at the time. So number 1 is language skills, and number 2 is identity. Those are the main issues, which are usually where people are given refusals for applications. And okay, thank you. I'll just a couple of minutes. I'll be. And then just quickly on dual citizenship. Since 2013, dual citizenship has been possible. And the aims will mostly have to do with facilitating people who live abroad to remain connected to Finland, Finnish people, and then encourage foreigners living in Finland. And there are some, like I mentioned earlier, there are nowadays some restrictions also on dual citizens, mostly to do with military and border guard. Citizenship and integration. Generally, the Finnish authorities in our study said that, from our study, revealed that it's been considered a step in the integration process, but it has not been mentioned very often in the government proposal lately. And generally, there has been very little research on the topic. And also, our EMN study mentioned that, found out that there's actually, unfortunately, very little targeted support given to new citizens in Finland. And acquiring citizenship in Finland is actually a fairly simple process. You acquire citizenship and you receive a short letter where it's just a couple of sentences saying that you have been granted citizenship. And there are no ceremonies or you are not demand to pledge allegiance to the Finnish state as such. So support measures and perks, there are some local, remain mostly local. Some cities have organized ceremonies, but on a national level, there are very few support mechanisms. And that is it. Thank you. Sorry for the time, but thank you for your time. Sure. Okay. Yeah, sure. In those cases, very often the issues have to do either with inadequate documents regarding identity. Of course, both countries have had issues in issuing reliable identity documents. So sometimes the issues have to do with that, or it has to do with language skills. So the especially in some cases, the people who arrive to Finland may have very little educational background or schooling, so they are often effectively illiterate. And even though they have, of course, in many cases they have tried, they might not have been able to receive the Finnish language certificate, so they apply for the exception for the language requirement. But in order to be able to get that or be exempted from that requirement, they would have to prove that they are illiterate. And sometimes, in many cases, it's not clear whether the person is fully illiterate or not. So these are like typical cases. Thank you.
To those of you that have joined us over live stream in the meantime, then we welcome you at the conference of Citizenship and Migration today and tomorrow, organized by the European Migration Network. And let me once again remind all of the participants, both online and present in person here, then you can feel free to submit your questions at www.slido.com should you have any to our speakers, and then please use the hashtag citizenship and send the questions our way. And we welcome questions from you all throughout the conference. And the next speaker will make her presentation over several seas and lands. Sarah Groark is a policy officer in the Irish National Contact Point of the European Migration Network based in the ESRI in Dublin. She has co-authored research on child migration, asylum law, migrant integration and discrimination in Ireland.
Yes, almost there.
Give you the air now for the next 15 to 20 minutes. The air is yours.
Thank you very much, and good morning to everyone there. I'm just putting my slides on the screen. Can you see the slides?
Almost. We can see the PowerPoint view. If you could put it in a percent mode, would be excellent.
Okay. So thank you, everyone, and thank you particularly to the Estonian National Contact Point for inviting me to speak at today's conference. It's a privilege to be able to join you virtually from my home here in Ireland, although I am sad I can't be there in person to join you all. So as was mentioned, I am working with the National Contact Point of Ireland, which is based in the Economic and Social Research Institute in Dublin. And today I'd like to present some information on the Irish contribution to the EMN study that Norma presented earlier. And we focused our study in Ireland on the naturalisation process for migrants to acquire citizenship. So in my presentation, I will present firstly some data on naturalisation in Ireland. I'll then provide an overview of the conditions required to become an Irish citizen, as well as some information on the processing of applications and citizenship ceremonies and what these look like in the Irish context. So firstly, on this chart shows the number of people that were granted Irish citizenship through naturalisation over the past 10 years. So you can see that from 2008, Ireland saw a substantial increase over time in the number of people that acquired citizenship through naturalisation. And this was in large part due to the fact that in the early 2000s, Ireland experienced an unprecedented increase in immigration, having previously been a country of emigration. And this led to a corresponding growth in the number of people who subsequently became eligible for citizenship in the late 2000s. So the number of people had increased from 4,000 in 2008 to over 25,000 by 2012. And the increase in applications in these early years had led to a significant backlog. So the Department of Justice in Ireland put in place processing improvements to deal with the rise in applications. So you can see that in 2012 and 2013, a large number of the backlog was processed and people were granted citizenship in these years. So since 2012 then, there has been a gradual decline in the number of people naturalising in Ireland. So in 2018, only 8,000 people were granted Irish citizenship through naturalisation. So in terms of nationality then, as with the EU average, the majority of migrants becoming Irish citizens through naturalisation are nationals of non-EU countries. And the most common nationalities are Nigeria, India, the Philippines, Pakistan, the US, and China. And in line with overall EU trends, we see a decrease in non-EU nationals acquiring citizenship in the last few years. However, what's interesting in the Irish context is that while we have relatively lower number of EU nationals becoming Irish citizens, here you can see in the dark blue, they're actually increasing. So while the overall numbers of people becoming Irish citizens has decreased in recent years, the number of EU nationals naturalising are gaining in number. And the most common EU nationalities that become Irish citizens in Ireland are Poland, Romania, the UK, Latvia, Hungary, and Lithuania. What is particularly of interest to this audience, and particularly in light of the next speaker, is that the number of UK nationals in particular has significantly increased in recent years in acquiring Irish citizenship. So you can see in 2018, 687 UK nationals became Irish citizens, in contrast to 2016, when only 98 UK nationals became Irish citizens. And this represents a 7-fold increase since 2016. You can see the proportion of UK nationals as well has increased. So in 2014, UK nationals represented less than 1% of the total number of people naturalising in Ireland. And this had increased to 8% by 2018. Now, just to note for context that this is only a small part of the picture of the citizenship acquisition by UK nationals since the vote to leave the European Union in 2016 took place. This data only presents naturalisation figures because the study only focuses on naturalisation, and a much greater number of UK nationals become Irish citizens through descent, so through their parent or grandparent. But like these figures, there has been a significant increase in the number of people from the UK who are claiming their entitlement to citizenship through descent. So moving to the policy framework then on naturalisation. So as I said at the start, naturalisation is the primary means of through which a migrant can acquire citizenship and establish their permanent residence in Ireland. We don't have a statutory long-term residence scheme in Ireland like in most other EU member states. So naturalisation really is the primary way in which a migrant can secure their residence permanently in Ireland. So the current naturalisation framework dates back to the 1956 Act, and this contains 5 key conditions to become an Irish citizen through naturalisation. So firstly, the applicant must be 18 years of age, or they can be a child born in Ireland and their parent can make the application on their behalf. Secondly, they must be of good character. They must also have 5 years of residence in Ireland before applying to be a citizen. They must sign a declaration to say that they intend to continue to reside in Ireland once they become a citizen. And lastly, they must declare fidelity to the state and undertake to observe the Irish laws and democratic values. So I think what's important to note as well, in contrast to other member states, as Norma described, it is the Minister for Justice, or it is the Department of Justice who take the application for naturalisation and make the decision. So the decision is made, a recommendation is made by the Department of Justice, and it's the Minister for Justice who decides on the application. So it's a horizontal sort of decision-making process. So the Minister for Justice has discretion to grant naturalisation. So what this means is that citizenship is a privilege and an honour rather than a right or entitlement. Now, in some cases, the Minister may waive the conditions for some groups. So if the applicant is a refugee or a stateless person or a child of a naturalised parent, the conditions can be waived. So in practice, what usually happens is the Minister will grant naturalisation after 3 years instead of 5 years residence for these groups. So then, just to provide some specific detail on the conditions I outlined. So as I mentioned, applicants must have 5 years of residence. And in law, this is 3 years. So for people who are married to an Irish citizen or who are the civil partners of an Irish citizen. Some residence permissions are not counted or cannot be reckonable for the purpose of citizenship. So if you are residing without a legal residence permission, if you are a student, or if you are an asylum seeker, the time you spend with these statuses do not count towards the minimum required period. Now, if you're recognised as a refugee, the time you have spent as an asylum applicant does count. The final year then for applicants of the 5-year requirement must be continuous. However, in practice, applicants can leave Ireland for up to 6 weeks for short-term absences. Now, last year in 2019, what continuous meant in the Irish context was brought into debate in a case called Jones versus Minister for Justice and Equality. So the courts handed down a decision in the High Court that continuous residence must mean that an applicant cannot leave the Irish state at all in their year prior to applying for citizenship. And this caused much concern among applicants and led to the processing of applications being put on hold for a number of months. However, ultimately, the Court of Appeal in Ireland overturned the judgment and ruled that it was not workable to have a rule that requires an applicant not to leave the country in the year prior to their application. So in practice, we still have this 6-week rule that is applied by the department. However, in certain cases, some practitioners and NGOs that represent citizenship applicants have highlighted this rule can be restrictive, particularly for people who regularly travel for the purpose of work or for family reasons. And it's not clear to what extent exemptions from the 6-week rule might apply to these groups of people. So moving then to the good character requirement. So as in other member states, Ireland requires either good conduct or character to be satisfied. But what this means in the Irish context is not defined in law or in policy, and there's no guidance provided to applicants on what they need to do or what they need to show to meet this requirement. In the application form, applicants must supply details on any convictions they have in the state, if they've been the subject of a police investigation or if they've been involved in crimes such as war crimes, etc. Then once the application is submitted, the Department of Justice will obtain information from the Irish police to assess if the applicant has a criminal record. Now, failure to satisfy the good character requirement is among the top reasons for refusals in Ireland. So this brings into stark, focus the fact that, there is a lack of guidance for candidates there. So this is a particular issue that's currently debated. In terms then of other requirements, I wanted to provide a comparison with other EU member states to highlight requirements that are not in place in Ireland. So, for example, in Ireland, there is no economic requirement. So an applicant does not need to demonstrate that they have a minimum level of income. At the same time, applicants must show proof that they have a source of income or what type of social welfare they receive. There's also no requirement to renounce the applicant's previous citizenship. So dual citizenship is permitted in Ireland. And lastly, as Norma mentioned, Ireland does not require applicants to demonstrate language proficiency. We also don't require applicants to demonstrate knowledge of Irish society or an integration test. However, what's perhaps interesting is that the Irish government, as part of the migrant integration strategy that was adopted in 2017, have committed to examining whether they should introduce these requirements and what the benefits might be of having these requirements in place. So turning then to naturalisation, the naturalisation process. Applications for naturalisation are currently paper-based and are submitted via post to the Department of Justice. As Norma mentioned, Ireland is one of the few member states that are examining the introduction of online forms in the future. Naturalisation applicants must also pay a fee, an application fee, and if they're successful, they must pay a certification fee to receive the certificate. And the certificate fee can be reduced in certain cases. So for children, it's reduced to €200, and that the fee is actually waived for refugees and stateless people. So I think in an EU context, the overall fee, and in addition to fees that applicants might need to pay for securing documentation and certifying documentation, these fees are quite high in an EU context. However, the Irish Department of Justice has highlighted that fees reflect the costs involved in processing applications, as well as the fact that they do keep the cost of fees under review to see whether the fees might deter people from applying for citizenship. In terms of processing times then, lastly, there are no limits set out in Irish law as to the amount of time in which an application must be processed by the department. However, in practice, the department reports that in recent years, the average processing time for a standard application is 6 months. Now, in the last year, this has increased to 12 months for standard applications, particularly in light of the fact that restrictions have been put in place to respond to the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, prior to the pandemic and this year, NGOs in Ireland, non-governmental organisations who represent citizenship applicants, have highlighted that some applicants experience significant delays, and this can be up to 1 or 2 years or more in some cases. And this is an issue that has been raised quite frequently in the media and in the Irish Parliament as well. So the last slide I wanted to discuss with you today was the citizenship ceremonies that take place in Ireland. And these were introduced in 2011 at the time when Ireland had received a significant number of applications, and more people were becoming Irish citizens through the naturalisation process. And the citizenship ceremonies were introduced to give recognition to the importance of citizenship and to mark the acquisition of citizenship with a sense of occasion. And the ceremonies have been welcomed across the general public, across applicants and non-governmental organisations as a positive development in Ireland. And I think the introduction of ceremonies has really raised awareness of the naturalisation process among the general public as well. So the citizenship ceremony itself is actually a mandatory final step in the naturalisation process. So all applicants must attend before they can become an Irish citizen. They also must make the declaration of fidelity to the state at the ceremony, and they'll then receive their certificate of naturalisation once they make the declaration. At the ceremony itself, an information booklet is also provided to applicants, providing information on the right to vote and how to apply for a passport. Now, in the past few months, of course, ceremonies have not been able to take place due to restrictions in light of COVID-19. And the government actually announced just last Friday that ceremonies will be temporarily replaced by a paper-based declaration over the post. So applicants can post a declaration to the Department of Justice, and the Department of Justice will send out their application or their certificate of naturalisation to confirm that they have become an Irish citizen. And this was to ensure that there are no further delays in the processing of applications by eligible citizens. So just to wrap up the presentation, as I mentioned at the beginning, there has been an overall decrease in people acquiring Irish citizen after a period of significant increase in applications. So we've seen that EU nationals are increasing in recent years. I think when on paper, at least, Ireland has comparatively favourable conditions for naturalisation in Ireland than in some other EU member states. Ireland views citizenship as a means to further integration, not only the final, citizenship being the final step in the integration process. So we don't require citizen or applicants to satisfy integration requirements, etc. We also allow dual citizenship, as I've mentioned. Now, despite this, applicants do face a number of challenges in applying for naturalisation, as I've mentioned. So the lack of guidance on permitted absences from the state, as well as the good character requirement, as well as processing times, which have been further exacerbated by the current pandemic situation. So I think I'll leave it there. I hope this gives you a broad overview of the approach to naturalisation in Ireland and some of the challenges we're experiencing. And I'm happy to answer any questions you might have. Thank you. Yes. Yes, so this is a concern that non-governmental organisations have raised that there is a need for further guidance on how the good character requirement is interpreted by the Department of Justice. So we see, for example, in the UK, they have a handbook which is publicly available to applicants and sets out the type of factors that should be considered by the Home Office. So while there haven't been similar guidance in Ireland, there has been a number of cases in the Irish courts, and so some judgments have provided guidance to legal practitioners and applicants on the type of factors that the courts consider must be included in order for the process to be fair and proportionate. So to a certain extent, some guidance has been provided by the courts. Now, as I said, the interpretation of good character is at the discretion of the Irish Minister for Justice. So taking that into account, any factors that are listed, they cannot be exhaustive. But I think what is being proposed by practitioners on the ground is this need for further guidance, particularly as it is, as I've mentioned, it is a requirement that leads to some refusals as reported by the department. Thank you.
Then I would like to remind you that you have landed at the EMN Estonian Contact Point Conference titled Citizenship and Migration today and tomorrow. We have 2 live streams available. One is the original version of the conference, where you can listen to the presentations both in Estonian and in English, and the other live stream on YouTube is only in English. And the final chord of the first panel will be a bit different in terms of what the topic is. Of course, the topic relates to the theme of the conference and to the previous presentations, but this presentation that is about to begin will be about the effect of Brexit on the British citizenship. And in a moment, I will hand the floor over to Piret Kuusik, who is the Junior Research Fellow at the Estonian Foreign Policy Institute. Her research focuses on the foreign and defense policy of the European Union, Brexit, German-French cooperation, and the role of Nordic-Baltic region in Europe and the world. And now, Piret, the floor is yours.
I kind of, it's always a dread because you know that people have been listening to those presentations, and you kind of know that, you know, I've been in the audience as well, that by the end of it you get quite bored and are thinking about coffee more than actually the presentation. So I thought, how could I make it a tad more fun than the usual one? Okay, I can see the slides from there. And for that purpose, I decided to use a book that is called How to Be a Brit. It is written by George Mikes, who was a Hungarian journalist and who became naturalised British citizen in 1946. And so most of the illustrations and some of the comments are from this book. I hope they make it a lively one indeed. So let's see whether it works. Great. So to start off, I think if we talk about Britain, then it is very important to understand that it is tad different than we understand in Estonia. If you have an Estonian citizenship in Estonia, then most likely you also identify yourself as an Estonian. However, in the UK, it is tad more complicated. And here is a kind of a small part from George Mikes' book. I know a naturalised Britisher who, talking to a young man, repeatedly used the phrase, "we the Englishmen." The young man looked at him, took his pipe out of his mouth and remarked softly, "Sorry, sir, I'm a Welshman," turned his back on him and walked away. And what I mean by that is that when we talk about British citizenship, then within that citizenship, there are actually 4 different nations. There are Englishmen, there are Scotsmen, there's Northern Ireland men and women, and there are Welshmen. And as George Mike says, you can become British, but you will never become English. And I do strongly suggest to keep that in mind when going in Britain, because you will offend people if you call the Scottish man an English man. But Britain is not only the island in Europe and a tiny part of another island. It also has its history, and as we here in Estonia know that you can't escape your history at all. So the imperial legacy still lives with the UK, and that also in their citizenship and in kind of and also in the story of immigration. And what you can see here is that today you can find people who have gained their kind of status as a British citizen or some kind of relation through 6 different types of, essentially through 6 different routes, I guess is the best way to characterize it, of which 2 today are active. So you either become a British citizen, or you have 10,000 people who are also considered the British overseas territory citizens, who are people who live or lived in the former colonies and somehow are connected to the UK. They own a British passport, but then most of them don't actually have the right to reside in the UK. And I think that these 6 types and the remaining 2 actually, I think, take quite well together the whole course of immigration and gaining access to British citizenship over the last century. And it shows that access has become more narrow and narrower. And I argue in my presentation that Brexit is making it also that the access even more narrower. But that all to say, don't worry if you can't really see the details of these graphs, but the first one shows the kind of the ethnic groups and how they've grown between the 2001 and 2011. My apologies for such a kind of old data, but the census was in 2011 and the new one hasn't come up yet. So you are in this kind of the victim of times. And what you can see that over those 10 years, all ethnicities in the UK have been rising. Most notably, the other whites, which mostly is the Europeans, and then the graph on your right side then shows the top 10 countries where people who living in the UK are from, and you can see that there's mostly the highest number or the highest increase has been among Indians. Then you have the Polish, Pakistani, and so on and so forth. But the fundamental point of this slide is to say that the UK is an incredibly diverse society. And though immigrants consist only, if I'm not wrong, 4%, then the ethnic makeup of the UK is very diverse and colourful. And that, I personally think, has led to this political question, and I think that many countries in Europe, but not only in Europe, also the rest of the world, are faced with this question: which kind of a country we want. So on your right, so in my left, you see a man in this top hat, the idealized version of British society that we think of. When I went to university in the UK, I thought that this is almost how life is going to be like. And on your right side, you see this much more diverse makeup of the British society. that is much more globalized and also follows a fairly different lifestyle than the one on your right. And I think if you look at the political discourse today in the UK, you see to some extent those contrasting visions. And it is only kind of, how can I say, it is how it is in the rest of the Europe and in other places as well, that the more diverse version of the country or the society is represented by people who live in big cities, who actually live together with ethnic minorities and migrants, and the more kind of traditional view on how to go forward into the future is represented by people who live in the countryside that tend to be more homogeneous in their makeup. And the way that kind of contrasting visions, I think, has played out into the British discourse is that immigration has become a terribly politicized issue. I think that the spark was given by, and not only I think that, but the spark was given by 2004 EU enlargement, where you saw a large number of countries joining the European Union and people gaining access to one of the 4 freedoms of the European Union, the free movement of people. And the UK was one of the desired destinations for people from Central and Eastern Europe. And then in 2010, you see the first time the Conservative Party's public manifesto for the elections says that we need to become much more stronger and much more stricter on immigration. And then it's tad infamous the time when Theresa May was a Home Secretary at the Home Office. So that's from 2010 to 2016. And there you very much saw how the Home Office changed and has changed into what it is today. So in 2012, they introduced this idea of a hostile environment for immigrants and migrants. And the idea was there that essentially, let's make the conditions such that people would leave voluntarily. That meant that they started to, access to services started to be limited. There were letters that people gained that you will be deported. And this kind of, and the deportations themselves tend to be, they're not to be particularly nice, let's say. And I think that the further stress, and just to kind of point out, there's a picture with the slogan that is a quote from Theresa May that said that we can deport first and hear appeals later. And that is the attitude, I think that can illustrate very well the attitude of a hostile environment, where it really is that, just go away and essentially rest. We don't essentially care about anything else, essentially. And the further stress was put on then on the European refugee and migrant crisis in 2015, where though the UK wasn't particularly, let's say, touched by it as such, because it is an island. You do have to actually cross waters to get to the UK. And UK was not particularly keen on taking on the refugees, but nevertheless, the pictures of chaos in Europe did kind of spoke to the British public. And so what you saw here is that immigration really became one of those top issues for British people living in the UK when thinking about their society. And you can see here that dark line is the rise of where people considered immigration the most important topic. And you can really see the spike in 2015 at the time of the European refugee crisis. And then after that, it started to decrease. And then with the Brexit vote, it has basically become one of the minor issues. And so, what is it with this Brexit? There are people who argue that Brexit is a result of this politicization of immigration. to some extent, I agree. I think Brexit is a very complicated issue where immigration plays a very big part, but there are also other reasons that led to this development. Today, we are in the situation where the UK has left the European Union at the beginning of this year. The transition period will end by the end of this year. And so essentially what we'll have next year is an entirely different story with the UK, or the kind of in the UK-EU relationship. And one of when we talk about the immigration in that debate, the kind of the central, the driving argument there was that uncontrolled immigration is an issue. People, and I think it was very interesting, where people mostly were, okay, like immigrants, if you ask them, okay, are immigrants good for the society? Yes, they understand the economics of it, they understand that we need them, but the fact that the UK government doesn't have a control over how many people and who comes to the Britain kind of seemed to me that central issue. And that also gave the way to the vote leave slogan, take back control. And here I think the kind of the peak of it really was the low-skilled seasonal workforce who tends to actually live more in the kind of the countryside of the UK. And yes, there are Polish and Romanians and Bulgarians in London as well, but London is already so diverse and mixed that it doesn't really kind of come so much to the fore. But when you are somewhere in the Northern England, and you have this, let's say in our cases, like a Turi-like place, and then suddenly you have 2-3 streets where there's only Polish people living, it does kind of, it contrasts very well, and the change itself is very visible. And that was something that the voters pointed out in many of the interviews, if you look back to that time. And as I said, Brexit is a complicated issue, and that change happened actually in a time where those same areas in the countryside have seen a decay of how can I say, socio-economic conditions. The financial crisis of the past decade really hit hard the countryside and the services and the life there. I studied at York. York is a lovely town, absolutely super cute, exactly what you see in Midsummer Murders. And now when I went back a couple of years ago, you have streets that used to be bustling with small businesses are today you see to rent. I think now, due to COVID, the things are even more dire. So you can't take out the economic or socio-economic change happening at large as well. Due to the withdrawal agreement, it was agreed that EU citizens will get the right to stay in the UK. Most of them I know, the statistic says that most of them do now have their papers in order. There have been some prominent cases where people who've been married and lived in the UK for 30 years and then suddenly they were denied the settled status, but in most cases it seems that going public and going to the kind of, how can I say, going to ask help from the newspapers and making things public has solved the issues. At least I'm not aware of this kind of long-standing dispute between the Home Office and EU citizens. And as said, migration to the EU has decreased since 2015. But as I also pointed out at the beginning, oopsie daisies, the imperial legacy hasn't gone anywhere from the UK. And what you saw in 2018 was the so-called Windrush scandal. So in 1948, the UK, ravaged by the World War II, decided to allow people who have been born in British colonies to come to the UK and essentially work for the UK's economy. And those people, roughly 500,000 people came. What happened was that many of them were kids. The documentation ended up being very messy. And many of those people didn't have documents, and what came out, many of them didn't have even passports because they were just did not have over the past, is it almost 70 years soon, didn't really have the means to go and travel, and so they never needed a passport. And with the hostile environment policy, you started to see cases where those people who essentially came to the UK knowing that they have the right to stay in the UK for long periods of time, that they started to also get letters to, letters saying that you will be deported very soon or you're illegal in this country. And up to 2018, when again the scandal or the scandal broke, and you saw both parliamentarians and many NGO groups coming out for the Windrush generation and telling like this is not fair what is going on. These people came to the UK with the promise that they can stay, and now they're being, and most of them are quite old, to be honest. So and you had these very personal stories of people being nurses and teachers and contributing to the British society, and then suddenly they are said that you can't be here anymore and go back to a country which many of them hadn't lived for a very long time or didn't even know anything about it. But what I think it brought out was a very fine line in the British society, where on the one hand you have this, to some extent, anti-immigrant tones, but then at the same time the attitude how the British government, the hostile environment policy is not really okay. People are not okay that even if you're illegal here, then you will be treated so meanly, let's say. So I'll just finish up on some notes on the post-Brexit Britain. So right now the Johnson government is very keen on the idea of having a points-based system, on the example of Australia, and it's all about skills, skills, skills. So essentially the idea is to give access to people who have skills and higher education, and those seasonal agriculture sector workers, there are schemes for it, but essentially the hope is that by pushing that workforce or that immigration out, the pay for in the sector will rise, and then people who live already in Britain would like to then go into and work in these areas. But migration also is becoming part of British foreign policy. This July, when the Chinese state, China put down its very stringent laws in Hong Kong, for instance, the UK offered 3 million people the right to come and reside in the UK, as Hong Kong is also one of the former territories of the UK. And also, one of the promises of the Johnson government is that, now when we're free, we can do all the trade deals and so on and so forth. But when Theresa May went to the Indians about it back then, the first thing that the Indian government asked was greater access to their people. And that's not really what the UK wants to give. So quite complicated. Will migration curb? Yes or no? I don't know that. There are arguments for both sides, but fundamentally the whole Brexit case is about control, and you can see that now when people feel that the government has the control, then it's not so much of a big issue anymore. We heard long about how to get British citizenship. It's quite similar to the other cases. And I will just finish up with George Michael saying, if you do become naturalised and gain a British citizenship, you must start eating porridge, speak English only with your former compatriots, revise your library, get books on life and thoughts of a Scottish salmon, for instance, instead of a Proust, and speak to your new compatriots only using the term we. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Piret, for your lovely presentation in lovely British, or shall I say York English. It was a pleasure to hear, especially given the topic. And we also have one question for you.
Sure.
You mentioned, obviously, also in your presentation that uncontrolled immigration, or at least the perception of it, and the desire to take back control, in inverted commas, was a central issue in Brexit campaign. How do you feel, or does the public feel that the uncontrolled immigration is less of an issue now, given that we are almost in the post-Brexit period, or approaching it?
I think so, and I also kind of brought out this graph that showed that immigration is not really an issue per se, and people started to worry about other things, so whatever these might be. But I think the UK, its story with. I am pro-European, but that does not mean that I see problems with the free movement of peoples. And I think the UK is an especially dire example on how it kind of went wrong. And so in that sense, I think there are lessons to be taken, and I hope we take them.
Thank you very much. Piret? Ja.
Stuff. Thank you.
Nüüd on aeg siis sealmaal, et me läheme väikesele virgutus- ja mõttepausile. Oleme tagasi täpselt.
Break for refreshing yourselves and get some cup of coffee, and we shall see you.
Welcome back, dear participants, dear people, and maybe also robots or simply bots who are following us. So we will now continue today's conference on the topic of citizenship and migration today and tomorrow, organized by the Estonian contact point of migration network. And in the second panel, we are going to focus on Estonia's choices in citizenship policy. And the first speaker will be Ruth Annus, Head of Citizenship and Migration Policy Department. Ruth has a long-term experience in managing these topics, and she's also teaching in Tallinn University migration topic. Please. It's a great pleasure for me to have this opportunity of giving an overview on this topic today, and I'm not going to stop that much on the historic background, but I will instead talk about the choices of Estonia historically, what the results have been, and where are we heading. Well, the first important framework is the Estonian Constitution. And according to the Estonian Constitution, a child acquires the Estonian citizenship based on the parents, because if the parents are Estonian citizens, the children will also become Estonian citizens, either they want it or not. And the ones who don't get Estonian citizenship by birth, they also can apply for Estonian citizenship. And they have to know the Estonian language and also express their loyalty for Estonia. And the age of an applicant should be 18 years, which is the age where people can already orientate themselves in the questions of the society and also give their input. But when talking about the history, we had to do a very principal decision first, who would be an Estonian citizen, because 50 years of Soviet occupation had led to a situation where we had about 500,000 people who were not Estonian citizens. And the first moment of decision was how much these people would have a possibility to influence how we live in Estonia. And talking about citizenship policies, we always have proceeded from an understanding that it's the citizens who elect the Estonian parliament, Riigikogu, and Riigikogu is the one adopting the Estonian legislation. And it was the Citizenship and Migration Authority, and later on also the Border Guard and Customs Authority who have been on leading positions, certainly also when the Estonian government have proved their activities. In fact, we have not had very many changes during this period of time, but really a principal decision was when we, on the 26th of February 1992, introduced a pre-war act on Estonian citizenship. And there were some points that were changed. For example, wife also received Estonian citizenship when marrying an Estonian man. But I brought this example in order to explain that the Citizenship Act had been enforced, in fact, all these 50 years. And during these 50 years, women had been marrying Estonian men, of course, and these people were often living in a foreign country. And then the question of citizenship stood up. And there was another topic about citizenship in Estonia, and it was a question of children of people with unidentified citizenship who were born in Estonia. And in 1998, an act was adopted about children born in Estonia whose parents had no citizenship, and if they had lived for 5 years in Estonia, then they could apply for Estonian citizenship for their children. This was really a question of big political debates in the 90s, because we wanted to avoid reproduction of people who had no citizenship. And then in 2016, the whole process was turned around, and children born in Estonia, they received automatically the Estonian citizenship, and their parents could apply for another citizenship for these children. But these children got an opportunity when they had turned 18 to restore their Estonian citizenship. So the big problem that we had was this problem of people without citizenship, unidentified citizenship. But now the situation is that it's all mainly about an older generation. At some point in time, this problem will be solved automatically by itself, and the reason will be death of these people, and some people will also adopt a different citizenship. Another topic that have occurred is that if the government has identified that this person is an Estonian citizen, and when issuing Estonian passports in 1992 and 1993, then there was this case of approximately 1,500 people who were mistakenly identified by the government as Estonian citizens, and their children as well. And this problem was to a certain extent solved in 2003, that made it possible before the nowadays Citizenship Act got into force. And the problem was solved in such a way that the situation of identifying them as Estonian citizens remained in force. And now we are again in this situation that we have to solve the problem of optants who returned to Estonia. So if the government has identified people as Estonian citizens without them taking initiative to this, what will happen to the legal status of these people? Even in this case, the Police and Border Guard Board defined these people as people who had got Estonian citizenship, as it was done also when the mistaken citizenship process took place in the beginning of 90s. Now, the question of dual citizenship. Until now, the Citizenship Act has been very principled about this. It's not a question of constitutional level, but it's a question that should be solved on the level of the Citizenship Act. And the Citizenship Act states that it's not allowed for Estonian citizens to have dual citizenship, neither for the naturalized one nor the ones who are Estonian citizens by birth. We have also Estonian diaspora around the world, the second, third, and soon also the fourth generation of Estonians who have historically been connected to Estonia. And of course, the question arises whether they could at the same time also be citizens of their country of residence. It's a question of political choice, of course, again, but it's very likely that people, Estonians who lived in other countries all over the world, that they also had adopted citizenship of other countries. And it's the citizens who have the right to design the rules of how we live here in Estonia. And then also we could think that people who are not that much anymore connected to Estonia, whether they should have the possibility to be a part of this process, to participate in the elections of the parliament, Riigikogu. And then we also have this question that foreign citizens who move to Estonia, are they expected to apply for Estonian citizenship, or do we expect that they keep their citizenship? So the rules are there, and the rest is a question of political choices. This was a short overview over the choices that Estonia has had. Constantly we have some new bills in the parliament under discussion both now and it has been so earlier as well. And it's important to continue the discussions about dual citizenship, what the legal consequences are, what the practical consequences are, and what Estonia can afford also from a legal point of view and from the point of view of political choices. Thank you very much, Ruth Annus, and as Ruth is going to participate in the panel discussion later on, and we will leave the questions for later. I'd also like to remind that on www.slido.com and #citizenship, you can all, both the ones who have gathered here in the hall and the ones who are following us over the internet, ask questions from panelists. But even the next speaker is a person who is very much dedicated to this topic. Erkki Koort is working as internal director of Security Institute of Estonian Academy of Security Sciences, and he has also been a part of visa waiver with USA and led the development of MID. And he, Erkki Koort, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for this beautiful introduction. And I must say that I have done many of these things together with someone else, for example, with Ruth. But true, I wrote the books myself. As you mentioned, I have written 3 books. But I will speak to you here for a very particular reason. When the migration network came over to the Estonian Academy of Security Sciences, established its office here, and a couple of months ago we discussed with them about the conference and the program, and the colleagues from Migration Network asked me to make a speech myself. So this is how I ended up here, and I'm delighted to be here. Thank you for this. I will tell you about the broader vision of citizenship and the ideas that we as a society should really have clear in our minds. And we should find time for these issues without having emotions related to that or having any political turmoil related to that. The options and the choices that come along with it and the risks that we have to assess are some things that Estonia would have to have a clear view of, whether we like it or not. We have to debate on these issues. A state must know who its citizens are. There is no doubt about it, because how else would the state be able to organize everything? And it is clear that the execution of the right to vote and the survival of democracy thereby are extremely vital. In terms of citizenship policies, it is also important for the state to know that some of its citizens are not citizens twice, not in the sense of having a dual citizenship, but rather not being a citizen of the same state twice. So here we refer to the double identities that the world has struggled with. And after the registries have been sorted out, the populations of some countries have declined considerably. Why are double identities being used? Well, people use them for hiding themselves or for having access to some benefits. We know that there was a case in Estonia as well, where a lady had 10 different identities to make pension claims that were fraudulent. And the other thing is that the state should know that whether a citizen of that particular state is also a citizen of another state. Why is that important? 12 years ago, when a person crossed the Estonian border, they actually made use of exiting Estonia by having the Estonian passport and entering the Russian Federation with using the Russian passport. And the border guard at the time did not ask for a visa in the Estonian passport because a Russian Federation passport was submitted to them. But when this matter was brought into attention, we started investigating, and of course, in some cases it was a matter of people that have the nationality at birth or citizenship at birth. For example, the citizens of Ivangorod or Pshori who remained in the Russian Federation after the political changes. The question here is not whether the citizens have to renunciate the other citizenship, rather the state has to know who the citizens with double citizenships are. And there were also some citizens that had been granted citizenship through naturalization and that had promised to renunciate the Russian citizenship. They had actually retained this citizenship or acquired the citizenship later again. The Compatriots program says that Estonia is unique in a sense that Estonia has the highest diaspora in Europe, meaning that about 15% of the Estonian population lives outside the Estonian territory or the historical area of Estonia. So it is about 160,000 people, equal to about 15% of the population, which is an immense figure for a country of our size. It has been said that in 1988, where there's a national song, political song revolution was held, there were about 165,000 Estonians present at that particular festival in 1988. But what does the same figure, about 160 or 165,000 Estonians currently abroad, mean? It means that the city of Tartu with 96,000 people, the city of Pärnu with 51,000 people, the city of Viljandi in Estonia with 70,000 people, the parish of Kihnu with 700 people, and the parish of Vormsi, another island besides Kihnu Island, with a population of 400, fits into these 160,000. Now, when we talk about the Estonian citizens at birth or Estonians having acquired citizenship by birth, then we must note that the state of Estonia has been created for the protection of Estonian culture and language and for the protection of its citizens. Here is a photograph from the Song Festival of 1910 in Tallinn. You might not see it very well, but the biggest flag here is blue, black and white, and at the back you can see the flags of the Imperial Russia. An important thing about this photo is that nobody at the time was a citizen of the Republic of Estonia, but we held the Song Festival. The culture has been there for thousands of years. Inevitably, with the creation of the state of Estonia, some Estonians were left outside, and among these 165,000 Estonians, there are also those that traveled to Abkhazia, that went to Abkhazia before the Republic of Estonia was created. Yet in 1992, the government of the Republic organized one of the biggest evacuations or the rescue operations from abroad to Estonia. And with 3 flights, 170 Abkhazian Estonians were brought back to Estonia, to their historical homeland. Abkhazia might seem as somewhat distant, and it is clear that Estonia cannot solve all the global problems. But let us take Gdov. Gdov is considerably closer to us on the other side of Lake Peipus, and it has been said that at the peace negotiations it was also discussed whether Gdov could also be one of the lands that Estonia wants to reclaim according to the peace treaty. This was not the case. It was not involved as one of the areas. At the time, 25% of the Gdov population was Estonians. Some of them repatriated. That means they came back to Estonia. Some were killed during the 1930s repressions. And I know that the relatives of a very good friend of mine come from that area. And, for example, my friend's grandfather was raised as a girl because male persons were simply eliminated from the population. And why do I mention both Abkhazia and Gdov here? Because return to Estonia has not always been a free will, a free choice. The communities have largely been established before the creation of the Republic of Estonia. And when we talk about the citizens at birth or being an Estonian by birth, then this is one of the important aspects we have to really have a clear understanding of. So what are we currently doing? We are somewhat combating the risks, or we are postponing the discussion either for political discussions or sometimes also economic, for political reasons or sometimes also political reasons. And with any risk, it might be natural to try to ignore the risk, hoping that the risk will somehow disappear. But the potential problem of 165,000 people does not really resolve automatically, because population growth also happens outside the Estonian borders and occurs with our compatriots as well. New generations are created, and tying these generations to Estonia, I think, is vital. Risk mitigation should be something that we work on, that we solve the problems, and that we are quite progressive in that. Now, as for the choices, I think that the important choices are those that make Estonia bigger, stronger, and I believe that it is important not to resolve the challenges ahead of us in an emotionally heated way. These topics have a considerable impact on our country's future as a whole. Thank you very much. Thank you, Erki. And now some sports as well. Ruth and Erki have already taken their seats. And next to them, we will shortly have two other important people I would like to introduce. And before I hand over the floor to the moderator of the panel discussion, I will introduce these two people. First, Mrs. Irene Käosaar, who is the director of the Estonian Integration Foundation and has become one of the most significant leaders of integration in Estonia. And under her initiative, two Estonian language houses were recently opened as well in Estonia. Her list of achievement is relatively long, and I shall not go through that. Rather, I will let Irene do the talking later on. And another expert that will be moderating the panel is Mari-Liis Jakobson, who is the Associate Professor of Political Sociology at Tallinn University. Her research relates to transnational migration, transnational politics and populism. Mari-Liis is also a visiting fellow at the Baltic Studies program of the Macmillan Center, next to being the Associate Professor at Tallinn University. And now the floor is yours. Hello, my name is Mari-Liis. I greet both the online audience and also those present here in person. I'm the moderator here, and we have already heard two very substantial presentations. We also have received some questions, but as we have not yet given the floor to Irene, we shall use with her, and we use the informal you in our discussions here, as we have all agreed on that. Now, when we talk about the newly arrived immigrants, then how many of those come to the Estonian language houses? What is the role of the Estonian Integration Foundation, and do the newly arrived immigrants need some other kinds of services than the permanent residents, so to say, or the permanent audience of the Estonian language houses do? First, I would like to thank you for this inspiring introduction. I'm honored to be here. Now a couple of words about the Estonian language houses. What are they, so that we would all understand what they are? Indeed, in 2018, the government of the Republic tasked the Integration Foundation to open two Estonian language houses, one in Narva on the eastern border and the other in Tallinn, in the Estonian capital. In addition to providing Estonian language studies, we know that the Integration Foundation had, next to providing the studies option, held different training courses and all kinds of events to integrate people better. There was a package of services, so to say. The needs were met, or seemed to have been met. But what was missing still? The supportive environment was missing. An environment in Estonian language was missing. An environment that would really create and support the Estonian traditional space, so that people would also learn about tradition. We know that the people in Narva, for example, might benefit from that. And people can really come to the Estonian language houses and learn the language via different methodologies, and they can also join the cultural clubs and the media education groups. There is also the tandem learning opportunity, where you learn a language with a local language speaker. So the change that I think that the creation of Estonian language housing brought about was that you don't really need to have the two addresses, Linda 2 in Narva and Rävala Boulevard 5 in Tallinn, but rather we want to also provide our programs in other cities of Estonia, for example, Tartu and Sillamäe. The newly arrived immigrants get to us after they have gone through the adaptation program organized by the Ministry of the Interior. So the Ministry of the Interior organizes an adaptation program where the newly arrived immigrants land to, or where they are directed to after they get to Estonia, and they get to us after they have passed this program. So the particular feature of the services provided by Integration Foundation is that we don't have a set of criteria for those that can benefit from our services. We know that the Ministry of the Interior works with the adaptation program. The Academy of Security Sciences has the Citizenship program. Then the Ministry of Education and Research offers Estonian language studies to different target groups, also for those that teach Estonian. The Estonian Unemployment Insurance Fund is a major service provider on the Estonian language studies market. Also does their work, but we don't have any criteria that we have set. You don't have to be employed, you can be, you don't have to receive a particular salary. You can, but don't have to be a citizen. You can have a grey passport, or you might be a citizen of some other country. So we don't have these criteria in place, and all the services are free of charge. So that was about the background for the Estonian language houses. Now, the main services that we provide is teaching Estonian, then also counseling, and also help with the adaptation services, and then also different activities that help a person to learn Estonian. The people that come and make use of our services can also attend media clubs, like I said. So the scale of services is quite wide. In addition to that, we also support different sports and cultural activities that our partners carry out, but we provide resources for that through different procurements, for example. Eastern Viru County in the eastern part of the country and the area surrounding the capital, the Harju County, are different because in Tallinn there are more newly arrived immigrants, and you can say that about 50% of those people that come to us for counseling services are newly arrived immigrants, and they have a diverse background. They have both a Russian background or Russian language-based background, for example, Russia, Belarus, the Ukraine, Uzbekistan, and the others have a largely English language-based background. So the range is very diverse. And let me give you a nice example. In one of our groups, we had 16 different people from 16 different countries, and when they introduced us during the first class, they introduced themselves, and somebody said that I come from Sillamäe. The others were asking, where is Sillamäe founded, or where is Sillamäe located? Actually, Sillamäe is a city in Estonia on the northern coast. In Narva, there are less newly arrived immigrants, and they have a more homogeneous background. Russia, the Ukraine, Belarus, Uzbekistan. So these are the main target groups. And about 10% of our counseling service participants and language study participants come from Narva region. And I looked at the report from the Ministry of the Interior on the newly arrived immigrants, and I could see that the main counties that the newly arrived immigrants go to are Harju County, Tartu County in southern Estonia, and thirdly in Eastern Viru County in eastern part of the country. So this is the largely Russian language-based area. And we cannot really generalize. We cannot say that all the Estonians are like that, and all the Estonians are like that, and the newly arrived immigrants are only like that. But there is one broader generalization that I dare to make, and that relates to how do the newly arrived immigrants differ from the less integrated permanent residents in Estonia. And this is a term that I don't really like to use, this less integrated permanent residents, but some plans use that term. So we can say that many of these people really have the motivation to study a language and really participate in these activities, not only come there in the evening and say that I tick the box by just having visited the Estonian language house. Active participation rate is actually higher with the newly arrived immigrants than it is with the less integrated permanent residents. We cannot really generalize with all the people that have been living here for 50 to 60 years and label them as less integrated permanent residents, because majority of them still have integrated very well in terms of learning the language and learning about the customs and adopting them. Now, as for the motivation, then a newly arrived immigrant usually knows what is the country that they come to, what is the language that is spoken in that country, and they also know that when they want to manage well in this country and to really relate to that country, they must be fluent in that language, not only on the C5 level, it can sometimes also be B1 or B2. So they would really need to be able to cope with the basic conversations in a shop, for example, not be given sugar when they are asking for salt in the grocery store, not be given white bread when they ask for black bread. And it is vital that the person feels dignified and valued in a society and feels as if they are a part of the society, a member of the society. So flexibility with them is higher. The naturalization indicator has reduced in recent years, and maybe it will start increasing again in the future, so that we will have the more motivated citizens. And like Erkki was saying, there is a lot to do with dual citizenship. This is quite topical. And we should also look at whether the people want to reside permanently in the country or they are just temporarily here. So all these come into play. And when I looked at the statistics, then we cannot really see a rise in these figures.
And the topic of the so-called grey passport is not the topic that is very topical right now. It's rather like the previous speaker mentioned, that it's about an old generation. Okay, but let's now give the floor also to other speakers. Let's talk about naturalization. And there are really many non-citizens who have lived in Estonia for a long period of time, and only for some time ago we had the lowest level of naturalized citizens. Is this a new normality where we have come? Nobody really wants to take Estonian citizenship, or what is the situation? Ruth, please. Yes, definitely, it's an important question. People who settle in Estonia, will they finally also take Estonian citizenship, or are they happy with preserving their previous citizenship? And of course, it's also connected to the question whether it's allowed to have dual citizenship in Estonia. And there are also problems connected to this. And the first prerequisite is loyalty to one's country, and also it's about sharing the political views and also ethical views. But being a citizen, if a person puts into practice its rights of a citizen based on the views of a citizen of a different country, then there is a risk in it for Estonia. And also considering the part of Estonians in the Estonian society, then it's a question of political choices. On one hand, we have really had an acceleration in the Estonian processes. 163,000 people have been naturalized into the Estonian society, and 2,470 people who had not identified their citizenship earlier have become citizens. And a big majority of these people are former citizens of the Soviet Union. And of course, the amount of new migrants among them is also extensive. So for Estonia, there are really moments of choice here. And then it's important to consider that we always have underlined that knowing the language, sharing the values is important for Estonia. And on the other hand, these people, they feel well here in Estonia without having Estonian citizenship. What would you say, Erki? Would there be a need of accelerating the Estonian naturalization process, or do you think that our future is all about multiple backgrounds in Estonia? It's such a complicated question. It's so difficult to answer this question. And in my view, it's positive that this process of entering into Estonian citizenship has not been very fast. If there are so many newcomers that the ones who have been staying in a country cannot absorb them, then it is questionable. But if it takes place in a slower pace, then it's less painless, in my view. And people with unidentified citizenship, of course, led to a very big discussion in Estonia. Will they be, so to say, Estonian citizens at birth, and they can also renounce the Estonian citizenship immediately. Now, talking about the connections between citizenship and security, yes, these questions exist, but it's possible also to fight against these questions. And whether Estonia can be hurt, whether Russian intelligence will come to Estonia, etc., etc. We have to think about our citizenship choices, proceeding from how to make Estonia stronger. When Estonians move to other countries, they also go for other citizenship, let's say Norwegian citizenship. There are some economic calculations behind it, etc. There was a case recently that a person wanted to start studying in our Academy of Security Sciences, but he was from Norway, and his parents were from Estonia, but he himself had Norwegian citizenship, so a third country national. And right now it's not possible to start the studies from the UK either here, but from next spring it will be possible again. So all these risks have to be earthed. And I'm quite confident that it is possible as well. And always when talking about these topics, I tend to mention also this, that Estonians have this really stupid habit that when somebody turns to us in the Estonian language, then we automatically switch into either Russian or English. And if one wants to do that, then you can do it in other places. But the ones who have migrated to Estonia, let us talk with them Estonian, although it might be complicated in the beginning, but we support them and support ourselves as well if we talk Estonian to these people. My next question is to Ruth, and it's also about the same topic and about the report. And maybe it's not a question directly about Estonia, but it says here that naturalization procedure is very long and complicated one in many countries. And in Estonia also, first you would have to live here for 8 years, and then there is a lot of bureaucracy after that. But from the point of view of a foreigner, it's like this, that the whole procedure is long and it takes time, probably half a year. But what is the perspective of the government? What is the point of view of Estonia as a country, whether somebody is awarded Estonian citizen or not? How is naturalization carried out? Well, it's easy. If they do the language test on B1 level, also the citizenship test, and if other criteria are also fulfilled, if a person has been living in Estonia based on residence permit for 8 years, then it doesn't take that long. It's not about a process of 6 months. But of course, we check also the basis of refusal of Estonian citizenship for people, whether it would be a case for this or not. And we check it via the ministry, we send it to the government office, and then the government takes the decision about citizenship. So it's all has always been a procedure where final decision is made by the government. And these applicants don't have to worry about their passports of their former home countries. And in order to apply for Estonian citizenship, they also have to bring a certificate, to present a certificate about that they are now refusing their former citizenship. And then the decision of Estonian citizenship enters into force, and then they can apply also for documents as Estonian citizenship. So I wouldn't really say that this process is somehow complicated. And we do have people who apply for Estonian citizenship, but this maladapted long-term Estonian inhabitants, they have also a possibility to apply for citizenship. But probably one of the reasons is that they are not integrated well, but it's very convenient to live for them in Estonia. But the point of choices is whether we, as a country, encourage them to take Estonian citizenship in order to give them a possibility also to give their input to democratic processes and to political choices in Estonia. But application of Estonian citizenship is still about some tests. There are some questions also through Slido. Maybe Ruth can answer this question. How many applications of Estonian citizenship did Estonia receive last year? In 2020, 621 people were given Estonian citizenship, and about half of them did not have any citizenship earlier, so about 340 of them were citizens, nationals of other countries. And all of this information is certainly available. And of course, there are also situations when Estonian citizenship is excluded. And one reason is criminal records, if they have been punished by imprisonment for more than 1 year. And there are also exceptions for refusals. And if people know that they have no perspective for Estonian citizenship, then of course sometimes it could happen that they are still enthusiastic and they try. And in Finland, they look at all kind of criminality in Estonia, also on criminal activities in Estonia. The next question, please.
What happens if somebody wants to apply for citizenship, but their country of origin will not let them renounce their previous citizenship? So this question was resolved about 3-4 years ago. We have made an exception. Let me note that this exception only applies to those that have been granted international protection. So we shall have to discuss about that in the future. We know that there are countries that release a person from their citizenship in a very painful way or in an almost impossible way. So it is almost impossible for that person to renounce their previous citizenship. So here we have to really consider the matters. For example, maybe a person does not have a work permit here, although they've resided in the country for a long time. They've been granted international protection, and maybe international protection is also the reason for why they can retain their previous citizenship. All right, very well. Another topic that has generated many questions is related to multiple citizenship. Estonia, de jure, does not allow for multiple citizenship, but tolerates multiple citizenship when Estonian citizens are at play. So what do you think? Maybe this system is already outdated. Let us think about 3 people. For example, somebody that has come to Estonia for work purposes has been residing in the country for 8 years and has decided that they would like to stay in the country for longer. The second person we could consider here is somebody from the Estonian diaspora who does not have a very close relationship with Estonia, but has a legal right as a diaspora representative to retain the citizenship. And maybe the third person could be somebody that is the spouse of an Estonian citizenship, of an Estonian citizen. So maybe they are from the States, and next to the US citizenship, they would now like to have the Estonian citizenship as well. And maybe you could comment on some of the examples that you choose. Irene, please. Well, we also work with the people that return, and we also come across the spouses of the returning, the returnees. And I think that the attitude towards multiple citizenship has really become outdated. Erkki was previously referring to security risks that are considered. I would really not like our state to be a state that would really consider the most negative scenarios when drawing up legislative acts. For example, somebody made a huge mistake or committed a particular crime, and we have to now implement the whole policy on everyone based on what that person did. But maybe the risks could be thoroughly analyzed, and the threats would be recognized, and we could really eliminate the risks. So I think we should not base our policies and our decisions on the risk groups or the risky people, but rather we should look at these people that do have the pragmatic reasons for having a particular citizenship, but they are also maybe emotionally attached to the country. They are loyal to the country, and we would like the people to be loyal, to abide by our customs and traditions, for example. So this is one aspect. And the other thing is that I think that the acts should be based on reality. Dual citizenship is an ordinary matter. I can think of 10 people that I know that have dual citizenship, and maybe there are even more among my acquaintances. So I can really vividly think about 10 already. So dual citizenship is actually there. People do have it, and I think it is somewhat stupid to really turn a blind eye on it and say that this does not exist. There is the first stage of integration that is not really integration at all, denial. My background is in education, and for example, when there is a classroom full of pupils and the studies are conducted in Estonian, then we sort of turn a blind eye on the Russian-speaking students in the class. So this is, I think, one of the most stupid things that we can do. So we should really open our eyes and look at what is the group we're dealing with. I think that children are one of the wisest in the society. They have not yet ceased to ask questions. They keep asking why, and annoying their parents. And my grandchild is really reaching that developmental stage in 2-3 years, so I'm getting prepared for that. But when you think about the question why, then this question why is really justified when we say that somebody should renounce their other citizenship because dual citizenship is not allowed. And we must understand that an Estonian citizen might really feel very sorry while having to renounce Estonian citizenship when considering whether to opt for the US citizenship. Which one to give away? The US one, says Erkki Koort. That was a joke. Thank you. And now, Erkki. Most people have not found themselves in such circumstances, but when we have mixed culture families with different value backgrounds, then this might be the case that a decision has to be made. But when this kingdom of peace will finally arrive one day, that is being promised, then maybe there will no longer be such questions we have to deal with. And I think that some risks nevertheless can be mitigated. The state of Estonia is not yet ready to allow for dual or multiple citizenship. There has to be a gradual discussion towards that. We should think about whether a member state of NATO and an EU member state should take this decision as the first step. Currently, let us, for example, take the case of a child. When this child turns 18, they will have to decide which citizenship they will renounce. Actually, the state will not force that child to renounce one or the other citizenship. But when I was sitting here and thinking that we are talking about 165,000 Estonians in exile on the other side of the border, they are our compatriots. And potentially, we should also think about the potential citizens of the state of Estonia that are there on the other side of the border. For example, Pchori. We know that many of those, many of those survived the Soviet Union, the Soviet regime, and after it collapsed, they dispersed all across Russia. It would be interesting to think about when would we have such a time, Estonia, when the right to having an Estonian citizenship would be held by more people that also have the right to hold another citizenship than to those who only have the right to Estonian citizenship. So we should really keep that in mind, that one day this might be the case, that people already have another citizenship, but they are also entitled to Estonian citizenship. So let us rather think about how could we make Estonia bigger, rather than thinking about how somebody keeps or might keep hurting us through such policies or through such rights or entitlements. And we should maybe turn the perspective into such an angle that we could see how could we become bigger or stronger than before. Thank you. And Ruth, now the floor is yours. I've always been interested in the dichotomy between the factual situation or the legal situation, and what should we do when there is this dichotomy? Which one should we change? Currently, we know that in legal terms, those that have got their citizenship by birth are equal to those that have got the citizenship by naturalization. And it is a really matter of principle. So, for example, when a person is not a law-abiding person, then does that person themselves have to correct their behavior, or is it the state that will have to correct their behavior for them? Of course, the Republic of Estonia has stated in its constitution that nobody can be waived of their citizenship that they have got at birth. The state has to tolerate the dual citizenship should this be the case. But I would like to live in a country where it is up to a person to be law-abiding rather than the state chasing them and applying sanctions, for example, in order to turn the people on a legally correct path. Citizenship Act nevertheless says that nobody can have the citizenship of another country. We are pressed for time. Coffee break is ahead of us. Thank you very much, Ruth Annus, Erkki Koort, Irene Käosaar, and to all members of the audience. We shall see you shortly, and you will get some additional information from the moderator, Martti. Thank you, Mari-Liis, and thank you to all members of the panel for this forward-looking discussion. We are currently at the Estonian Academy of Security Sciences, whose Latin slogan says verbis aut re, both with your words and with your deeds. So like we heard, let us hope that their words are being followed with deeds, no matter how can that be achieved depending on a person's opportunities. So once again, we have come to a short break. Feel free to refresh yourselves, stretch a bit, and rest your ears and eyes, and we shall see you again in 15 minutes. So currently it is 1:22 p.m. Estonian time, and we shall...
Tere tulemast tagasi Euroopa rändevõrgustiku Eesti kontakti.
So, welcome back to today's conference organized by European Migration Network Estonian Contact Point. And I would also like to apologize in front of the ones who are listening to us online. And there were some technical problems in between here, but if you're listening to us now, you probably have found us again. Let's now go on and continue with the third panel. And the next speaker will be Ave Lauren from Estonian Business School, and she will talk about the annual report of Estonia's Migration and Citizenship Policy 2020. Ave works with Ave has been she's a PhD in geography from the University of Cambridge. Hello everyone, and welcome all participants who are present and who are online. While in the first half of today's conference, mainly the presentations focused on the citizenship and migration topics, my task is more to give an overview over migration and citizenship topic both in Estonia and also in Europe. And my presentation is put together as follows. I will first elaborate more on migration trends, legal migration and irregular migration and return. And after that, I will move on and talk about future challenges. And in the end, I will also talk in more detail about EU Pact on Migration and Asylum. And if you have questions, you are welcome to ask the questions via the Slido system. But if it's not possible for you to ask the questions in such a detail as you would like to, then we also have this annual report, and it's available in the Estonian language. And translation into English is also available, but the report itself on migration and citizenship policy is in Estonian. In order to understand better the tendencies, it's also good to look at general trends. In the 21st century, migration has extensively grown in the world. According to UN, in 2019, there were 272 international migrants in the world, million migrants in the world, which is 3 times as much as in 1970. And according to UN, an international migrant is a person who lives outside the country where he or she was born. And considering all people who have left the country where they were born, we could say that the biggest majority of these people, 83.6 million, live in Asia, and Europe is on the second place, including also free movement inside the EU. But what can we add more? Migration in Estonia. All these tendencies affect also Estonia. And migration has increased. According to Migration Authority, last year the number of Estonians grew with 5,500 people. And the majority of the ones who arrived to Estonia were from Ukraine. So this has also been a topic in the Estonian press and has also been a part of the political debates. But they have mainly moved to Estonia to work here, and Estonians are afraid that they will take the workplaces of Estonian. But generally, talking about migration, we could say that the attitude of Estonians towards migration has become more accepting. And although many Estonians think that, according to the migration to Estonia has been very low, and according to Eurobarometer, migration is still one of the main challenges. Only 12% of Estonians considered migration to Estonia as one of the main problems. But we also have to consider all political changes of 2019 when talking about migration. We had elections in spring of 2019, and there was also a change in policies as a result of that. And more attention is paid to security questions and illegal migrations. But of course, there were also elections in many European countries. And why is it important? Because in many European countries, the governments have found that situations have not been solved. And this is why the European Commission also wants a fresh start. But we will talk more about it a little bit later. Anyhow, all EU member countries had to introduce changes into their legislation, including also Estonia. So in 2019, in February, a decision was taken about UK citizens as a result of Brexit, and talking about legal acts, UK citizens can remain in Estonia until the end of this year, but the ones who will come next year, they will apply for a permit of stay in Estonia. We don't quite know how this will develop in the future. First, I would like to elaborate more on legal migration. In fact, the biggest majority of migration in Europe is all about legal migration. And 3.4 first residence permits were issued in Estonia, million residence permits were issued in the EU for study and for work. Poland has become one of the main migration source countries in Europe. Then it's UK, Germany, Spain, and France. Estonia is one of the countries in the EU that issues the least number of first residence permits in the EU. In 2019, also work migration, employment migration was regulated a lot in many Estonian EU countries, and changes here are connected on one hand to labor force crisis that has been in focus in many countries, and on the other hand there are also attempts to avoid a situation where this additional labor migration could lead to problems. So we could say that, as you can see on this draft as well, many of these countries have tried to calibrate and modernize labor migration systems. In 2019, very many countries also focused on attracting foreign students, and they are seen also as a possibility to solve labor problems. For example, France set as a goal to have 500,000 foreign students in 2033. And in 2018, they issued 84,000 first residence permit. So in Latvia, they introduced also new legislation in order to support stay of students in the country. We can also bring out the fact that many countries signed bilateral cooperation agreements, as, for example, Spain and Morocco. And Moroccan students can go to Spain for their studies and after that return to Morocco. Then family migration, although this is one of the main migration channels in Europe, was not changed very much. And now let's come to Estonia. According to Police and Border Guard Board, about 6,000 first residence permits were issued last year in Estonia. And this is about 18% more than the last year. Compared to 2018, we could also say that family migration grew with 36%, and family migration was followed by labor, studies, entrepreneurship, and other reasons. The biggest majority of first-time residence permits were issued to Ukrainian citizens, followed by Russian, Belarusian, and Nigerian citizens. And in different areas of migration, there are different nationalities. Family migration from Russia, students from Nigeria, and from Ukraine, we mainly get migrants who are here to work. Now, main developments in Estonia are also about reforms of labor migration. As a good example, we can take here a special regulation for startups. In 2019, compared to earlier years, maybe compared to earlier years, there were not that many changes introduced, but we could here mention the first digital nomad visa that was created in Estonia. It's a web-based identity, and it does not depend on the location. It's all about virtual working, and it enables for foreign persons to come to Estonia, to stay here as a tourist, but to continue working in a different country as a freelancer. Well, in Estonia as well as in the rest of Europe, there is also a problem with the labor force, and a solution for not changing anything in the quotas. Estonia introduced these short-term work visas. And in 2019, about 32,000 short-term employment visas were issued. And it grew with 62% compared to the previous year. Now, talking about family migration, the changes introduced didn't come that much for governmental institution, but it come from the judicial system. And in 2019, the highest court instance declared that Aliens Act is in conflict with the constitution, and now it's possible to issue residence permits for same-gender people who come to Estonia for family life.
And now we talk about integration and citizenship. As today's conference focuses a lot about the citizenship politics and the developments related to that, then first and foremost we are focusing on integration here. In the last decade, immigration to the EU has increased, which is why the foreign communities in Europe have gradually increased in Europe. In the end of 2018, there were 21 million foreigners living in the EU. 20 million of them had a residence permit for at least 1 year. That means that it also includes the permits that were issued for an unspecified term. About 2/3 of all the foreigners lived in 4 EU states. In Germany, 4.5 million, in Italy, 3.6 million, in France, 2.9 million, and in Spain, 2.7 million. And like Irene was saying, then the groups of foreigners have become really diverse, so that you can really have a group where 16 different countries are represented in a group of 16 people. And the diversification of migration and foreign communities has posed challenges both for the quality of adaptation and integration services. And this is why almost all EU member states have started to reform actively their integration policies and activities, and the same trend continued in 2019 as well. The improvement of the socio-economic situation for the third country nationals in Europe was paid most attention to, as was the integration of the labour market, mainly the training opportunities and also acquiring necessary skills on the local labour market. For example, Italy started collaborating with different chambers of commerce and organizing national entrepreneurship training courses. And in Latvia, there were very many entrepreneurship training courses, and they also continued with launching the business incubator called Migrant Talent Garden. There were many developments in other integration sectors as well, and a lot of attention has also been paid to vocal education, for example, in Germany. That would also help to solve the labor force problems. In Ireland and in Great Britain, a lot of attention is being paid to the integration activities happening on the local level in the community. Why is this being done? Because people see that such integration activities can possibly reduce conflicts on the local level and possibly also avoid polarization. Unlike many other European countries, the total number of foreigners in a country, that is Estonia, has decreased over the last decade, and this decrease has been caused by the reduction in the population with the grey passports, that is, with undetermined citizenship. We have already spoken about undetermined citizenship here today, but compared to 1992, where there were 490,000 people with undetermined citizenship, currently the figure is 70,000. So partly this has been caused by naturalization as well. I don't remember whether somebody already highlighted it, but in 2019, 768 people were granted Estonian citizenship through naturalization. Among those, the biggest group was those with undetermined citizenship, then also citizens from Russia, the Ukraine, Turkey, and Georgia. And irrespective of the fact that the total number of foreigners residing in a country has decreased, the immigration and the foreign communities in Estonia have become more diverse. The necessaries and the expectations of the people that arrive in Estonia currently are very different from before. We can see increasing communities from Asia, from the Middle East, and also from African background. Their expectations to the services of integration are different. And this is why a lot has been done in adaptation and in integration in Estonia. And many developments also continued in 2019. For example, the Tartu Welcome Center was opened last year, and its aim is to help the newly arrived immigrants adapt smoothly in Tartu, that is in southern Estonia, and in the southern Estonian region. And what is being done at Tartu Welcome Center? For example, there are free counseling sessions, then adaptation programs, seminars, Estonian language courses, and one can also apply for the personal identification code and register their residence in Tartu. And like Irene mentioned previously, in 2019, the Estonian language houses were opened in Tallinn and Narva, offering free language studies. And in addition to the traditional language courses and independent studies, there are tandem learning opportunities, language cafes, and clubs for getting to know the Estonian language and culture better, and also different workshops. The Estonian state has tried to increase people's interest in naturalization and to also simplify the acquisition of citizenship for those that have resided in Estonia for a long time. So last year, the draft legislation was started to amend the Citizenship Act. It was adopted and it entered into force in the beginning of 2012. And there is ongoing work with different action plans. Among those, as one of the most important ones, I would like to highlight an action plan drawn up by the Ministry of Culture and by the Ministry of the Interior. And this action plan is called the Development Plan 2021-2030 for population and for a cohesive society. Now let us talk about international protection and asylum applications and decisions in the EU. In 2019, the number of international protection grew in Europe for the first time after the migration crisis, and the number for applications for primary international application in EU 28 member states was 675,320, and the number of total applications was 743,225. The most primary international protection applications were submitted by the Syrian citizens, 76,265, and by the Afghanistan citizens, 56,365. And Venezuela ranked third with 44,800. In the last decade, we have related the international protection in Europe primarily with the citizens from the Middle East, but in the last couple of years, the number of applications from the Southern and Central American countries' citizens has continued to increase. Compared to 2015, the number of applicants has grown by 1,162.7%. That is more than 12 times. Most applications were submitted by Venezuela, by Colombia and El Salvador citizens. And still, most applications for international protection are being submitted in Germany, 142,450, that is about 21% of all the applications, but the number of applications in Germany in total reduced by 12% compared to the previous year. Now let us look at the relative asylum pressures across member states. In recent years, there has been a lot of talk about the asylum pressure in countries, especially in terms of solidarity, and the European Asylum Support Office has assessed the asylum pressure in different countries connected to the applications for international protection. And when you look at the number of at the amount of applications for international protection in EU countries compared to the population of a particular member state, to the size of a particular member state and to their economy, then most applications were submitted in Cyprus, Malta and Greece, and the least were in Slovakia, Hungary and Estonia. Now key developments in the EU. One of the biggest challenges in Europe is still the reform for the common asylum system. Although the European migration crisis has almost ended, then the aftermath and the long-term impacts will still last for years. Hence, the need for a new asylum policy functioning in the new situation is still there. And this is a topic that is a priority one for the new European Commission as well. Yet, last year in Europe, there were few developments here. The EU continued to coordinate the relocation activities, and the member states have also reviewed the legislative acts related to receiving the refugees. For example, Ireland has increased the subsistence for those applying for asylum in Ireland, and Germany applied a €200 grant for those asylum seekers that do voluntary work. Many member states also organized assessments and external audits in 2018. Due to the judgment of the European Court of Human Rights from the 14th of November 2019, according to which Finland breached the human rights by sending a protection applicant back to Iraq, and that person was later murdered in Iraq. Then the government of Finland started thorough investigation to see where were the problems related to quality in the proceedings process. And 319 asylum decisions were reviewed as a result of this investigation, and 10 cases were discovered where the applicant should have got international protection but had not been awarded that. So what is the situation with asylum applications in Estonia? In Estonia, out of all the EU member states, the least number of applications for international protection were received last year. Starting from 1997, 1,202 foreigners have applied for protection in Estonia, and protection has been granted to 531 persons, including to 213 persons that have arrived in Estonia under the European Asylum and Migration Pact. In 2019, 101 first international protection applications were submitted in Estonia. Added to that were 3 applications for prolonging international protection. Refugee status was granted to 38 people in 2019, and additional protection for 5 applicants. 7 people arrived in Estonia through the relocation scheme, and the most beneficiaries of protection in 2019 came from Turkey, Russia, the Ukraine, and Egypt. Now, there were no big developments in terms of processing the applications for international protection in Estonia. Rather, the current system was refined, and the biggest institutional change that took place was the coordination of services, and also transferring the services provided to the Social Insurance Board from the Ministry of the Social Affairs. And another bigger change or innovation in processing was that starting from September 2019, the Police and Border Guard Board started issuing the 3-in-1 situations. That means that once the applicant is not awarded protection, then within one administrative act, a person, together with the denying or the refusal to grant asylum, they will also get the return decision and also the ban on entry decision as well. And now we will talk about irregular migration and return. As for the number of illegal border crossings on the European Union external border, then it was on the lowest level compared to the 5 previous years in 2019. Altogether, 141,846 illegal border crossers were caught on the EU external border. That was 4.9% less compared to 2018 and 92% less than at the peak of the migration crisis in 2015, when 1.8 million illegal border crossings were registered. The main country of origin was Afghanistan. 34,154 Afghan citizens crossed the EU border. Compared to previous years, in 2019, the share of women, minors and vulnerable groups decreased. Among the group of illegal border crossers, about 25% of the border crossers were women, and also about 25% of those that crossed the border were minors. Unlike previous years, illegal migration moved back towards east on the Mediterranean Sea, and you could also see that the migration pathway on eastern Mediterranean was reactivated, and people tried to get to Europe 47% more in 2019 than they did in 2018. Frontex registered 722 illegal border crossings on the EU's eastern land border. And on that border, the situation remains calm. And although there is a decrease in the number of illegal border crossings, then the total number of those that are illegally in the EU continues to be high. In 2019, 650,175 persons were discovered in the EU that did not have the legal right to be there. The biggest amount of them were in Germany, in Greece, and in France. Among them, there were most Afghan, Ukrainian, Moroccan, and Syrian citizens. Now, as for returning the EU, then we have seen great fluctuations over the last decade in both in irregular migration and also in the number of asylum applications in Europe. But the total number of the return decisions and also executed return decisions has remained relatively stable. In 2019, in 28 EU member states, 513,470 return decisions were issued, which is 7.4% more compared to the previous years, and most return decisions were given to the Ukrainian, Albanian, and Moroccan citizens. And the biggest number of executed return decisions came from Poland, Germany, and the United Kingdom. And in Portugal, there was the biggest annual increase. There was an annual increase of 66.1%, and also in Estonia, 47.9% more executed return decisions compared to the year before. Now, when we look at the key developments in the EU in 2019, then the awareness-raising campaigns were paid a lot of attention to in 2019. Introducing the legal migration pathways and also the options for return. As for the success rate, that was different, but let me highlight the great campaign from the Netherlands. And the Netherlands organized that campaign together with the returned persons in Nigeria, Cote d'Ivoire, Senegal, and elsewhere in Africa. The Netherlands is also one of the few countries that also made a thorough evaluation. For example, in Senegal, they discovered that actually, as a result of this awareness-raising campaign, the intent to leave Senegal reduced by 25%. But the systems were also made more effective. In some countries, for example, in Hungary and Bulgaria, it meant that the conditions for appealing decisions were made stricter, time limits were reduced, and limits were restricted in terms of appealing certain extradition orders. There were many developments also in detention sector. 11 member states changed their practices and laws, but the developments were also contradictory. For example, some countries decided to make their detention rules tougher. For example, Sweden, who increase the number of people detained in detention centers and thereby increasing the success of returns from 38% to 45%, but other countries looked for alternatives to detention, especially when they are dealing with minors. For example, in Belgium, they no longer started housing the families that will be returned in detention centers.
On the level of the EU, one of the main developments has been also the Frontex mandate widening. They received Frontex regulation meant that their powers were enlarged when communication with the third countries. And also information system and intercooperation between these systems that makes it easier to biographically and biometrically identify and exchange information about people. Now, talking about irregular migration and return in Estonia, we always have had rather low data, but in 2019, in total, in 1,410 persons were found irregularly migrating to Estonia, which is 27% more compared to the previous year. And mainly this happened in the border stations, and the biggest majority of these people were Ukrainian citizens, 80%. And when looking at the rest of these people, we can also say that the destinations from where irregular immigration occurs are also destinations to where budget flights are organized. And totally 1,172 returns were executed in Estonia, which is compared to the previous year 35% more. And as in the rest of Europe as well as in Estonia, last year focus was put very much on prevention of irregular migration. Already the previous government of Estonia adopted an action plan for prevention of illegal employment in Estonia, and it was executed last year. Also in Estonia. In addition, also preparations were made for mass immigration if it would happen. And what is mass migration? According to risk analysis of Police and Border Guard Board, we talk about more than 3,000 migrants who arrived to Estonia in bigger groups. But now let us move to some bigger topics. And all these data that I have been mentioning now are in this report. You can read them later on. But I would now like to mention some main topics that we will have to pay attention to, both in Estonia and in the EU in the coming years. So, COVID-19 and its aftermath. How shall we treat this question? COVID can mean closing down borders, introducing new regimes of migration, meaning that it's defining who can move, where is it possible to move. In other words, we will have to think about much more systematic problems in the coming years as a result of COVID-19. And this spring, many problems were suddenly identified on the labor market. And here I am talking about the problem of workforce who would pick strawberries in Estonia. And this is a sign of that Estonia has become dependent on foreign labor force in the agricultural sector. And in Europe as well, several crises occurred as the supply chains of food were interrupted. And one of the problems is that specific employees offer also for labor migrants the permissions to stay in a country. But now, as COVID-19 pandemics struck, it meant that suddenly people staying in a country lost their permit of stay in a country. And suddenly it occurred in a situation of COVID that it was not possible to fly back to their home countries, although for this labor force they had to leave Estonia. In other words, we will have to review these policies of labor force. And another moment that would have to be reviewed is also migration of qualified labor talents. Compared to earlier years, traditional conservative countries as China and Japan have started to introduce really big changes in their migration policies. And Japan tries to attract about 300,000 specialists in the coming years. And in addition, we also see some African countries doing the same as Rwanda, Kenya, South Africa, etc. And another topic that we would have to pay attention to is the different crises in the vicinity of Europe. In we can see signs of danger in addition to Syria, also in Lebanon. Also the big explosion in the harbor of Beirut is a part of that. And in Lebanon, there are 1.7 million immigrants in addition to their own population. And there is also a pressure migration from Africa. About 10 African countries are now showing signs of economic crisis because of the fact that until now the African diaspora in other parts of the world have been transferring money to their countries of origin. And this has now stopped. And another need that we see now is that we urgently need a reform of the common European asylum system. And applicants of asylum in Greece, in Italy, has left thousands of people in very restricted situations with health risks, etc. So they find themselves locked up in a potential corona center. And this was a warning that we heard also this spring, what we saw also this spring on the island of Lesbos, warnings about so-called caravans. And in September, on the island of Lesbos, in Moria refugee camp, there was also a big fire. So we can see also protests about their situations coming up. So the last topic that I would like to mention is the new pact on migration and asylum. And as the asylum pact is very topical now, the European Commission suggested a new pact of migration and asylum. And the hope with this suggestion is to offer a new approach for fair administration, for solidarity and sharing responsibility, and to leave aside the ad hoc solutions of now. And that this has to be divided into 6 different goals to increase trust through better and faster work, well-managed and integrated border administration, solidarity rules, also a reaction on different situations, cooperations with international partners, and also attracting talents to the EU. But basically, we're talking about a set of documents, 500 pages, and they are under discussion in member states right now. So the process has just started. The package of talents, for example, being attracted to the EU, has just started the work with this package. But in addition, we would have to answer also the question of most critical question, which is the new solidarity mechanisms. And the new solidarity mechanism offers for member countries a more flexible possibility for countries to give their share into the solidarity. And while until now it basically meant replacement, now it means also support of return. So what does this mean? If pressure in a country increases in a member state, let's take Greece or Italy, if the number of asylum applications increases very fast. After that, the Commission calls other member states to fulfill their solidarity obligations with the country that needs help. And if a member state does not include their
and when the contribution by the member state is not sufficient, that means that it is less than 30% of the desired amount of how many would be displaced or returned, then the Commission will start the correction procedure, which means that the member states who did not respond to the first call for solidarity must have to contribute at least by a half according to the so-called fair contribution, which is calculated based on the ratio towards population and GDP. But hereby I would like to conclude, as we have run out of time and we cannot go in greater detail in these matters. Thank you, Ava. We have a couple of questions, and although we are already past the agenda in terms of time, then I picked out the most relevant of the questions in terms of the current times. As you have analyzed so many data, then the topic is the corona pandemic. It is a relatively new topic, but what could its impact be in the years to come if we don't yet already know that now? I think that if we were to talk here about what is the possible impact on the migration trends, then it would be really hard to say that right now. So far, temporary measures are the ones that have been put in place. As for border management, border regimes, in spring, when the emergency situation was declared, several temporary measures were adopted. But honestly, I suggest you take a look at the different reforms of the or the information booklets by the European Migration Network that focus on the special measures, labor migration and student migration. The impact of COVID is so extensive that we cannot really point out something specific here. Once again, thank you very much, Ave, for such a substantial presentation, and I assume that you call upon everybody interested in the report to really take a look at the report. The report is available at the EMN website at emn.ee. So enjoy reading that. Thank you. Dear participants of the conference, those brave ones who have survived until the end at the Academy of Security Sciences, and those brave ones as well who have been watching us online since the early morning or since the break. We are delighted to see that we had more than 130 observers online at peak times. Thank you for dedication. Thank you for your time. We know that time is the most valuable resource for everyone. But before we disperse into the rainy autumnal Tallinn here or before you move on with your days in Europe elsewhere, then let us take a quick look at the main messages that we have been given from today's conference. Our energetic day on citizenship and migration was kicked off by Mr. Veiko Kommusaar, who said that citizenship should be of value for the person, for the state, and for the system in general. The rector for the Estonian Academy of Security Sciences, Marek Link, spoke about the need to create a society that unites people, not separates people, and focus on what unites people. Norma Rose talked about how different EU member states have made the rules stricter or looser in terms of the third country nationals in obtaining the citizenship. We also heard about the Finnish citizenship politics and the Irish naturalization, where we saw that among the Brits, the Irish citizenship has become more popular. Tuukka Lampi from Finland, from the Finnish Migration Board, said that Finland is a very open country, and when amendments are being made to the citizenship legislation, then the respective results of respective debates are taken into account. Piret Kuusik from the Estonian Foreign Policy Institute talked about the impact of Brexit on the Great Britain's citizenship matters, and briefly touched upon other countries as well. Ruth Annus from the Ministry of the Interior gave us a historical overview of the Estonian citizenship politics in Estonia. And it was a pleasure to listen to the head of the Internal Security Institute, Mr. Erkki Koort, from the Estonian Academy of Security Sciences, who said that Estonia should have new visions that would make Estonia bigger and stronger. So this is definitely an inspiring thought for future conferences as well, and for future debates as well. In the only panel discussion we had today, among others, we talked about the fact that maybe citizenship as such has already become outdated in Estonia, or the citizenship politics rather, and we should maybe discuss whether there are any opportunities to change it, taking the broader picture into account. And Ave Lauren was the final speaker who told us about the annual report of the Migration and Citizenship Politics 2020. But as was said, you should refer for few further details to the report itself, or should you like to check up on some facts or look in depth into some topics. Indeed, such annual reports are being published every year, and we hope to introduce the new report at the new conference next year. I would really like to thank you all for your time, and we hope that we will meet either physically or virtually in the times to come. We don't yet have a virtual home on Facebook, but we do have a webpage, emn.ee, and you can also subscribe to our newsletter. Thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of your day.